Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is knock on a stranger's door and ask for help. In the winter of 1874, that's exactly what Marnie Tellis did when she stumbled into the Montana mountains, bruised and barefoot, with nowhere left to run. The woman who answered was Verla Deeks, a tough mountain midwife who trusted no one and asked few questions. When Marnie whispered, "Can I stay here?" Verla said yes. But it wasn't mercy that opened that door. Verla recognized something in the young woman's eyes, the kind of fear that comes from running from more than just a beating. Over the weeks that followed, trapped together by snow and silence, the truth about what Marnie was fleeing would surface, and it would shake an entire town. What secret was worth running barefoot into a mountain winter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The door had opened on instinct, not kindness. Verla Deeks had learned long ago that mercy was a luxury mountain women couldn't afford. Yet when she saw the girl standing there, barefoot in February snow, her face a canvas of purple and yellow, bruises, blood crusted at her hairline, something ancient and knowing stirred in her chest. It was the same recognition a deer might have when spotting another deer in a hunter's sights. "Can I stay here?" the girl had whispered, her voice raw as winter wind. Verla had stepped aside without a word, letting the cold and the stranger both sweep into her cabin. That had been 3 days ago, and in those 3 days the girl had spoken perhaps 20 words total. Her name was Marnie Tellis. She was 19 years old. She took her coffee black. That was all Verla knew, and truthfully, it was more than she'd expected to learn. The cabin sat at the far edge of the Montana territory, tucked into a mountain hollow where the pine trees grew so thick that even in daylight the forest held shadows. It was a 2-room structure built by Verla's second husband before consumption took him 12 years back. The main room served as kitchen, parlor, and Verla's workspace, for she was a midwife and had been for 30 years. Shelves lined one wall, crowded with glass jars of dried herbs, pennyroyal for women's troubles, arnica for bruising, willow bark for pain. A scarred wooden table dominated the center of the room, where Verla had delivered more babies than she could count and set more broken bones than any doctor in the valley below. The second room belonged to her sons and her mother, Tobias, and Gideon slept in narrow beds against one wall, while Opal, Verla's mother, now 73 and sharp as a knife despite her trembling hands, occupied a corner near the stove's warmth. Marnie had been given a pallet near the fire in the main room, layered with quilts and a bearskin that still smelled faintly of the animal it had once been. Tobias was 26, built like the pines that surrounded them, tall, silent, strong. He worked timber in the warmer months and trap lines in winter, providing meat and pelts that kept them fed and clothed. His hands were scarred from axe work, his face weathered beyond his years, but his eyes held a gentleness that reminded Verla of his father. He'd been watching Marnie with cautious concern since her arrival, never speaking directly to her, but always aware of where she was in the room. Gideon was different. At 23, he carried the volatility of his own father, Verla's first husband, the one she'd fled from in the dark of night with Tobias, a swelling in her belly and nothing else to her name. Gideon had his father's dark eyes and darker moods, though Verla had worked hard to raise him better than the man who'd sired him. He didn't like Marnie's presence. He'd made that clear the first morning, standing by the fire with his arms crossed. "We don't know her," he'd said. "Could be anyone, could bring trouble, could be someone who needs help," Tobias had replied quietly. "Help costs, food costs, and winter's only half done." Verla had ended the conversation with a look, the kind of look that only mothers can give, weighted with authority earned through years of keeping children alive against all odds. Gideon had gone silent, but his resentment had remained, thick as smoke in the close air of the cabin. Now, on the third evening, Verla sat at her table with her midwife ledger open before her. It was a thick book, leather-bound, its pages yellowed and crowded with entries dating back decades. Each page documented a birth, the mother's name, the date, the child's sex and condition, any complications, payment received. It was more than a record. It was a history of the mountain community, a chronicle of life persisting in hard country. Verla ran her finger down a page from 15 years ago, stopping at an entry that had always troubled her. The name read, Mrs. Benjamin Garrison, stillborn male, February 14th, 1859. She remembered that delivery with uncomfortable clarity. The Garrison house, grand by mountain standards, with its whitewashed walls and imported furniture. Mrs. Garrison, pale and silent throughout her labor, her eyes holding the same hollow fear Verla now saw in Marnie. The baby had been born blue and still, the cord wrapped tight around its neck. But it was what came after that haunted Verla. As she'd cleaned the tiny body, Mrs. Garrison had gripped her wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "Save yourself while you can." Verla had never understood that warning. 2 months later, Mrs. Garrison had died. A fall down the stairs, they said. Benjamin Garrison had remarried within the year. The memory sat uneasily now, with Marnie sleeping by the fire and snow falling steadily outside. Verla closed the ledger and looked at the girl. Even in sleep, Marnie's face held tension, her jaw clenched, one hand fisted in the quilt as though holding on against a current trying to sweep her away. "She's running from a man," Opal said from her corner. The old woman rarely spoke, but when she did, people listened. "You can always tell. It's in how they sleep, like they're ready to bolt." "I know," Verla said. "You going to ask her about it? When she's ready to tell. Might be never. Then it'll be never." Opal nodded slowly, her gnarled hands folded over the quilt on her lap. "I knew another girl like that once. Stayed up here one winter, long time ago, 20 years, maybe more." Verla looked at her mother sharply. "Catherine? That was her name. Sweet girl. Scared of her own shadow." Opal's eyes grew distant. "She left come spring. They found her at the bottom of Miller's Gorge a month later, said her horse threw her." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Verla had been younger then, newly established in the cabin, still learning the mountain's ways. She remembered Catherine vaguely, a pale wisp of a woman who'd appeared one winter night much like Marnie had. Catherine had worked for her keep, helped with chores, never spoke of where she'd come from, and then she was gone. And then she was dead. "You think—" "I don't think nothing," Opal interrupted. "I'm just telling you what was. Make of it what you will." Tobias came in then, bringing cold air and the smell of pine. He'd been checking the trap lines, and from the empty game bag, it had been a fruitless trip. He glanced at Marnie, then at his mother. "Snowing harder," he said. "We'll be locked in for a week at least." "Good," Verla replied. "Means nobody else is moving either." Tobias understood. If Marnie was running from someone, the snow was their ally. It bought time, created distance, made pursuit difficult if not impossible. He nodded and moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot that always sat warming there. Gideon entered behind him, less snow-covered, but equally cold. He'd been splitting wood, and his shirt was damp with sweat despite the temperature. His eyes went immediately to Marnie. "She awake yet today?" "Some," Verla said. "Ate a little breakfast." "She say anything?" "No." Gideon made a sound of disgust. "We're harboring a ghost. Don't even know if she can talk." "She can talk," Verla said firmly. "She's just got nothing to say yet. Or she's hiding something." "Everyone's hiding something, Gideon. That's called having a past." He opened his mouth to argue, but Tobias laid a hand on his shoulder, a gesture both warning and brotherly. Gideon shook it off, but fell silent, pouring his own coffee and retreating to sit near Opal. The cabin settled into its evening rhythm. Verla prepared a simple supper. Venison stew from yesterday's kill, cornbread with the last of their honey, dried apples stewed with cinnamon bark. The smells filled the small space, warm and rich. Marnie stirred at the scent, her eyes opening slowly. She sat up carefully, wincing as bruised ribs protested. Verla had examined her that first night. checking for broken bones, assessing the damage. The bruises were extensive: ribs, arms, face, thighs. Some were fresh, purple and tender, others were older, fading to green and yellow. A map of violence written on young skin. "Supper's ready," Verla said, her tone matter-of-fact. She'd learned that pity only made frightened creatures more skittish. Marnie rose slowly, pulling a shawl, one of Verla's, around her shoulders. The remnants of her own shawl, torn and blood-stained, hung on a peg by the door. Marnie's eyes went to it briefly, then away. They ate at the table, all 6 of them crowded around its scarred surface. For a while, the only sounds were spoons against bowls, the crack of the fire, wind against the shutters. Then Opal spoke. "What's your husband's name, girl?" The question hung in the air like an axe suspended mid-swing. Everyone froze. Marnie's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, large and dark in her pale face, fixed on the old woman. "I didn't say I had a husband," Marnie said quietly. It was the longest sentence she'd spoken since arriving. "Didn't have to," Opal replied. "You've got the look. And that's a wedding ring under that twine you wrapped around your finger." Marnie glanced down at her left hand. She'd indeed wrapped rough twine around her ring finger, covering the thin gold band beneath. Her jaw tightened. "His name doesn't matter anymore." "It will if he comes looking," Gideon said. "He won't find me here." "You sure about that?" Marnie met his gaze steadily. "I'm not sure about anything, but I'd rather die up here in the snow than go back." The words carried such flat certainty that even Gideon fell silent. Verla studied the girl, no, the woman. For whatever Marnie's age, she'd lived through enough to age her beyond years. "Nobody's sending you back," Verla said, "and nobody's dying. You're safe here long as you need to be." "Why?" Marnie asked. And for the first time, something besides fear showed in her eyes. Genuine curiosity, maybe even suspicion. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." "That's true," Verla agreed. "But I know what bruises like yours mean. And I know what it takes to walk barefoot through snow, rather than stay where you were. That's enough for me." Marnie's eyes glistened suddenly, tears threatening but not falling. She looked down at her bowl, her throat working. "Thank you," she whispered. The meal continued in a more comfortable silence. After, the men cleaned up while Verla tended the fire, and Marnie sat watching, as if learning the rhythms of this strange new sanctuary. When the work was done, Tobias pulled out a battered harmonica and played a few quiet tunes. Nothing fancy, just simple melodies that filled the cabin with something softer than wind and worry. Later, when everyone had settled for sleep, Verla lay awake on her own narrow bed, listening to the breathing of her household. Tobias's deep and steady, Gideon's lighter, occasionally broken by a snore, Opal's thin and whistling, and Marnie's quick and shallow, the breathing of someone who even in sleep couldn't quite rest. Verla thought about Catherine, about Mrs. Garrison's whispered warning, about all the women she'd known over her 62 years who'd worn bruises like shame and silence like armor. She thought about her own flight 26 years ago, with Tobias barely a flutter in her belly and her first husband's rage following her like a hound on a scent. She'd made it, remade herself, built a life from nothing, in a place where questions weren't asked, and the past could stay buried under snow and years. Maybe Marnie could do the same, but even as the thought formed, Verla felt a prickle of unease, a sense that this time was different. Catherine had died, Mrs. Garrison had died, and Marnie had that same shadow in her eyes, the shadow of someone marked by something larger than an angry husband. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. Snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the world beyond their clearing. For now they were isolated, protected by winter and distance. But winter always ended, and whoever Marnie was running from, Verla had a feeling he was the kind of man who wouldn't stop looking. Tobias left for town before dawn on the 4th day, the sky still dark and the stars sharp as broken glass in the cold. They needed supplies, coffee, flour, salt, and more than that, they needed information. In mountain country, news traveled slow but steady, carried by trappers, traders, and the occasional circuit preacher. If someone was looking for a missing woman, word would reach the town of Stillwater eventually. The ride down took 3 hours on horseback, following trails barely visible under fresh snow. Tobias's mare, a steady grey named Temperance, knew the way by heart, picking through drifts and around ice-slicked rocks with the confidence of long practice. Tobias rode with his rifle across his lap and his thoughts on the woman sleeping by his mother's fire. He'd seen abused women before. The mountains attracted them. Women running from husbands, fathers, brothers, men who thought ownership came with marriage or blood. Most passed through quickly, heading for bigger towns or Oregon country, where new lives could be carved from timber and ambition. A few stayed, finding work or remarrying, becoming part of the landscape. But Marnie was different. There was something deliberate in her silence, something measured in the way she watched people. She wasn't just frightened, she was calculating. Tobias recognized it because he'd learned young to read danger, to know when a person was cornered and when they were planning. Marnie was planning something. He just didn't know what. Still water emerged from the pines like a promise half-kept. A dozen buildings clustered around a frozen creek, smoke rising from chimneys, life stubbornly persisting despite the cold. The general store, the saloon, the land office, the church. A blacksmith, a doctor who was drunk more often than sober, and a sheriff who preferred poker to law enforcement. Tobias tied Temperance outside the general store and stamped snow from his boots before entering. The warmth inside was immediate and welcome. A potbelly stove glowing red, the smell of tobacco and coffee, shelves crowded with goods both practical and frivolous. Mr. Pendleton, the shopkeeper, looked up from his ledger. Tobias didn't expect anyone from up mountain for another week at least. Running low, Tobias said simply. He handed over his mother's list, written in her careful, slanted hand. While Pendleton gathered items, Tobias wandered the store, his eyes moving over familiar displays. And then he saw it, a piece of paper tacked to the board by the door, fresh enough that the ink still looked wet. Missing woman Marnie Tellis Garrison, age 19. Brown hair, brown eyes, last seen February 10th, 1874. Wanted for theft from the Garrison household, $50 reward for information leading to her recovery. Below the text was a crude sketch. Not quite Marnie's face, but close enough to make Tobias's stomach tighten. The drawing showed a plain girl with downcast eyes, demure and unthreatening. It looked nothing like the woman at his mother's cabin, the one with steel in her gaze and defiance in the set of her jaw. That went up 2 days ago, Pendleton said, noticing Tobias's attention. Thomas Garrison himself brought it. Said his wife ran off with family jewelry and cash money. Thomas Garrison, Tobias repeated, keeping his voice neutral. Richest man in 3 counties. Owns half the land between here and the territorial line. Young fellow, maybe 30. Married that girl last year. She was from back east somewhere, I think. Sad business. He seemed worried about her? Pendleton shrugged. Seemed more angry than worried, if I'm honest. Kept talking about the theft, how she'd betrayed his trust, how he needed her found so she could answer for what she'd done. Tobias studied the poster again. Wanted for theft, not missing and in danger. Not feared harmed or lost. Wanted for theft like a horse thief or a claim jumper. Sheriff looking for her? It was for a few days. Rode around asking questions, checked the usual places. But he gave up pretty quick. Said if a woman wants to disappear bad enough, she'll find a way. And with snow like this, she could be anywhere or dead in a drift. Could be, Tobias agreed. He finished his business quickly, paid for the supplies, and loaded them onto Temperance. But before leaving town, he stopped at the saloon, not to drink but to listen. Saloons were where truth hid beneath rumor, where men said things they wouldn't say to their wives or the law. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the sour smell of old beer. A handful of men hunched over tables, nursing drinks and playing cards to pass the winter hours. Tobias bought a whiskey he didn't want and found a corner where he could watch and listen. The conversation drifted from weather to timber prices to women, as it always did when men gathered without purpose. And then, inevitably, it turned to Marnie Garrison. Crazy, running off in winter like that, one man said. A trapper named Hughes, whom Tobias knew slightly. Maybe not so crazy, another replied. You ever meet Thomas Garrison? Cold as Creek ice, that one. Polite as Sunday, but there's something off about him. Rich, though, Hughes said. Why would she leave that? Money don't warm a bed if the man in it gives you the chills. She stole from him. That's what I heard. Heard different. Heard she took what was hers. Jewelry her mother left her. Thomas called it theft because it made him look less like the kind of man a woman would run from. You saying he beat her? A pause. Then carefully, I'm saying there was a girl worked in that house, kitchen maid, about 2 years back. She disappeared sudden-like. Thomas said she stole silver and ran off. But my wife knew her family, and they never heard from her again. Not a word, not a letter. Could mean anything. Could mean Thomas Garrison is the kind of man makes women disappear. Tobias felt cold despite the stove's heat. He finished his whiskey and left without speaking to anyone, mounting Temperance and turning her back toward the mountain trail. The ride up was slower, his mind working through what he'd learned. Marnie Garrison, not Marnie Tellis, married to Thomas Garrison, a man whose wealth bought silence and whose reputation carried shadows. Wanted for theft, but the theft itself was questionable. And underneath it all, the implication that at least one woman connected to Thomas had vanished completely. By the time Tobias reached the cabin, night had fallen, and his hands were numb despite gloves. He unsaddled Temperance, rubbed her down, and gave her extra oats before heading inside. The warmth of the cabin embraced him. His mother looked up from her mending, her eyes sharp and questioning. Gideon was sharpening his knife by the fire. Opal dozed in her chair. And Marnie sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching him enter. Tobias pulled the wanted poster from inside his coat and laid it on the table in front of his mother. Verla read it slowly, her face unchanging. Then she looked at Marnie. This you? Marnie nodded once. You steal from him. I took what belonged to me. My mother's jewelry, money I'd earned before we married. He kept it locked away, said it was safer that way. Said I didn't need it. When I left, I took it back. Why'd you leave? Marnie's hands tightened around the cup. Because staying would have killed me. One way or another. Verla glanced at Tobias. What are they saying in town? That she's a thief. That Thomas Garrison wants her found. That the sheriff looked but gave up. He paused. And that another woman connected to Thomas disappeared 2 years ago and was never heard from again. The silence that followed was profound. Even Gideon stopped sharpening his knife, the scrape of metal on stone ceasing abruptly. What was her name? Marnie asked quietly. The other woman. They called her a kitchen maid. I didn't catch her name. Josephine, Marnie said. Her name was Josephine Shaw. She was 16. Thomas said she'd stolen silver and run off, but I found her things, her clothes, her mother's Bible, hidden in the attic. She wouldn't have left those. Not if she'd really run. You think he killed her, Verla said. It wasn't a question. I think she said no to something he wanted, and he made sure she couldn't tell anyone about it. Marnie's voice was steady, but her eyes were haunted. There were others too. Before I came, his first wife, Sarah, they said she died of fever, but the woman who attended her burial told me Sarah had bruises around her neck. And his mother, the one who died in a fall. I found her diary hidden in the wall of my room. She'd been documenting his father's violence for years, planning to leave. And then she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. Verla's face had gone pale. His mother. I delivered her last child. It was born dead, and she stopped remembering. She told me to save myself while I could. I thought she was just grieving. She was warning you, Marnie said, because you'd seen too much. Been in their house, witnessed how things were. The Garrisons don't like witnesses. Gideon spoke up, his voice rough. If this is true, if he's killed before, then you're not just running from a bad husband. You're running from a murderer. I know, and you led him right to our door. Gideon, Verla said sharply. I'm not wrong, Ma, that poster's in town. If anyone saw her on the trail, if anyone connects her to us. Nobody saw me, Marnie interrupted. I made sure of that. I waited until the servants were gone for the day. I took the back trails. I walked at night. It was luck I even made it this far. I was aiming for the territorial line. but I got turned around in the snow." She looked at each of them in turn. "I didn't mean to bring danger here. I can leave tomorrow if—" "You're not leaving," Verla said firmly. "Not in this snow and not with a man like that looking for you. But no buts. You stay until spring at least. By then, maybe he'll have given up. Or maybe—" She looked at the poster again, at the word theft in bold letters. "Maybe we'll find a way to make sure he can't come after you at all." Tobias folded the poster carefully and tucked it into his pocket. "For now, nobody in town knows she's here. And if the snow keeps up like this, nobody can get up the mountain to check. We've got time." "Time for what?" Gideon demanded. "To figure out what to do," Verla said. "To keep this girl alive. To make sure she doesn't end up like the others." Marnie's eyes filled with tears, the first Tobias had seen from her. "Why would you risk this for me? You don't even know me." Verla reached across the table and took Marnie's hand, the one with the wedding ring hidden under twine. "Because 26 years ago I was you, running in the night from a man who would have killed me if he'd caught me. I had nowhere to go and no one to help. I survived by luck and stubbornness. You deserve better than luck." Marnie's tears spilled over then, silent and silver in the firelight. Verla squeezed her hand once, then released it and stood. "We'll talk more tomorrow. For tonight, everyone needs rest. And Gideon—" She fixed her younger son with a hard look. "This woman is under our protection now. Whatever you think of the risk, that's how it is. Understood?" Gideon's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Understood." They settled for sleep, but Tobias lay awake long after the others' breathing had steadied. The wanted poster felt heavy in his pocket, weighted with implications. $50 was a lot of money, enough to tempt people who might otherwise mind their own business. And Thomas Garrison was clearly a man who got what he wanted, one way or another. Outside, snow continued falling, each flake a small barrier between Marnie and the man hunting her. But snow melted. Spring came, and when it did, Tobias had a feeling Thomas Garrison would come too. They had until then to figure out how to protect her, or how to stop him. The days that followed took on a strange, suspended quality, as if the cabin existed outside normal time, held in winter's grip like an insect in amber. Snow fell continuously for 5 days, then stopped, leaving drifts that reached the cabin's eaves and transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable. The world beyond their clearing ceased to exist in any practical sense. They were alone, isolated, thrown together by circumstance and held there by weather. Marnie began to emerge from her shell, necessity forcing her into participation. She couldn't simply sit by the fire forever, not with 6 people sharing close quarters and work that needed doing. On the 6th day after Tobias's trip to town, she rose early and began helping Verla prepare breakfast, slicing salt pork, mixing cornmeal, setting the table. Her movements were careful, practiced, the motions of someone trained in household work. "You cook much before?" Verla asked, watching her work. "Every day." Thomas liked his meals particular. Breakfast at 7 exactly. Dinner at 6. No deviation. Marnie's voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. If something wasn't to his liking, She stopped, her hand tightening on the knife she held. "He'd what?" Marnie set the knife down carefully. "He'd make me remake it. Stand over me while I did. Explain in detail what I'd done wrong. Sometimes for hours." She looked at Verla. "That was on good days. On bad days, he'd just sweep everything off the table. Make me clean it up and go without supper." Verla felt anger kindle in her chest, a cold, controlled anger she'd learned to bank over years. "That's not a husband. That's a jailer." "I know that now." They worked in silence for a while, and then Opal shuffled over, her thin frame wrapped in layers of shawls. The old woman studied Marnie with eyes that saw more than most. "You wear that locket like it's armor," Opal observed. "What's in it?" Marnie's hand went instinctively to her throat, where a small silver locket hung on a tarnished chain. It was the only jewelry she wore, and Verla had noticed she never took it off. Even when washing, she kept it carefully above the water. "Nothing that concerns anyone else," Marnie said, but without hostility. "Fair enough," Opal replied. "But you hold it when you're scared. Touch it when you're thinking. Whatever's inside, it matters to you." Marnie didn't respond, just returned to her work. But Verla saw the way her hand lingered on the locket, protective and possessive. When the men woke and came to breakfast, Gideon's eyes went immediately to Marnie. He'd been watching her like this for days, not with kindness, but with suspicion barely contained. As they ate, he finally spoke what had been simmering in him. "So how long exactly do you plan to stay?" "Gideon," Tobias warned, "it's a fair question. We're not a charity house. We've got limited supplies, and every mouth matters when you're snowed in." Marnie met his gaze without flinching. "I'll work for my keep. I can cook, clean, mend. I can help your mother with her midwife work if she'll teach me. And come spring, I'll pay you back for whatever food I've eaten." "Pay us with what?" "The jewelry you stole." "It wasn't stolen. It was mine. That's not what the poster says. The poster is a lie." Marnie's voice remained calm, but something flashed in her eyes, a glimpse of the steel beneath her fear. "Thomas Garrison is very good at making lies sound like truth. It's one of his talents, and we're just supposed to take your word for it. You're supposed to use your own judgment. Look at me." Marnie stood, setting down her fork. "Look at these bruises. They're not from falling downstairs or walking into doors. They're from fists and boots, from being held down and punished for things like speaking when not spoken to, or smiling at a shopkeeper, or having opinions about what I wore." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises in various stages of healing. "This is from 3 weeks ago, when I asked if I could write to my sister. This," she touched her cheekbone, "is from 2 weeks ago, when I didn't hear him call my name because I was in the cellar. And this," she lifted her skirt slightly, showing a boot-shaped bruise on her shin, "is from the night I left, when he caught me packing." The cabin was silent except for the fire's crackle. Even Gideon looked away, his jaw tight. "So yes," Marnie continued, lowering her skirt, "I took jewelry that belonged to my mother. And I took money I'd earned doing sewing work for neighbors, money he'd kept locked in his desk because he said I couldn't be trusted with it. And I'd do it again, because those things were the only currency I had to start a new life, the only thing standing between me and starvation or selling myself to survive." She sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. Verla reached over and covered one of those hands with her own. "You don't need to justify yourself to anyone here," Verla said quietly. "You're staying as long as you need to. That's settled." Gideon pushed back from the table and left, slamming out into the cold without his coat. Tobias started to follow, but Verla stopped him with a shake of her head. "Let him walk it off. He's scared, that's all. Scared of what helping you might cost us." "He's right to be scared," Marnie said. "Thomas won't stop looking, and he's got money to hire people. Come spring, we'll deal with spring when it comes. For now, we're locked in together, so we might as well make the best of it." And they did try, over the following days, to find a rhythm. Marnie proved herself useful in countless ways. Her stitching was finer than Verla's, her bread lighter, her coffee stronger. She had a gentle way with Opal, helping the old woman with small tasks that preserved dignity while acknowledging frailty. And she seemed genuinely interested in Verla's midwife work, asking questions about herbs and remedies, watching carefully as Verla prepared tinctures and poultices. "Why'd you become a midwife?" Marnie asked one afternoon as they worked side by side, grinding dried pennyroyal with mortar and pestle. "Didn't have much choice," Verla admitted. "When I came to the mountains, I was pregnant and running. I had Tobias in this cabin with nobody to help but a trapper's wife who happened by. She taught me what she knew, and I learned the rest from necessity and books. Women up here need midwives. Doctors are too far and too expensive. So I became what was needed. You saved yourself by learning to save others." Something like that. Marnie was quiet for a moment, the rhythmic grinding the only sound. "Then I want to learn. Really learn, not just watch. I want to be useful." "You are useful." "No, I mean," Marnie struggled for words. "I want to be necessary. Someone people need. Not just someone who makes good coffee or mends shirts. Someone who matters." Verla understood. She'd felt that same drive once. The need to prove her existence had value beyond what men decided it did. "All right," she said. "I'll teach you. But it's not easy work. It's blood and screaming and sometimes losing both mother and child despite everything you know. It'll mark you. I'm already marked, Marnie said simply. So the lessons began. Verla started with the basics, identifying herbs, understanding their properties, learning which helped and which harmed. Marnie absorbed it all with an intensity that surprised Verla, memorizing quickly, asking smart questions, making careful notes in a small book Tobias found for her. But Gideon's resentment didn't ease. If anything, it deepened as Marnie became more integrated into their household. He watched her with Opal, with his mother, with Tobias, and something in him hardened. On the 9th day, his anger finally found its target. It happened in the afternoon. Marnie was alone in the main room, the others outside dealing with various tasks. She'd taken off her shawl to wash it, and the locket was visible, gleaming against her plain dress. Gideon came in from chopping wood, his face red from cold and exertion. He saw the locket and something shifted in his expression. "That's real silver," he said. Marnie's hand went to it instinctively. "It was my grandmother's. Worth something, then. Part of the jewelry you took?" "No, I've had this since I was a child. It's personal. Let me see it." "No." Gideon moved closer. "You're living off our charity. Least you can do is prove what you say is true. Show me what's inside." "It's none of your concern. Everything in this house is my concern. My mother, my brother, my grandmother, you're putting them all at risk." "So yeah, it's my concern." He reached for the locket. Marnie's reaction was immediate and violent. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, twisted it sharply, and when he reflexively pulled back, she moved with him, using his own momentum to flip him onto his back on the floor. In an instant, she had her knee on his chest and a knife, a small folding knife she'd pulled from somewhere, at his throat. "Don't ever touch me without permission," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Not you, not anyone." "Never again." Gideon froze, his eyes wide with shock. This wasn't the frightened, beaten woman who'd arrived at their door. This was someone else, someone who knew how to fight, how to hurt, how to survive. The door burst open and Tobias rushed in, taking in the scene instantly. "Marnie, let him up." Marnie blinked as if waking from a trance. She saw what she was doing, saw Gideon beneath her, the knife in her hand, and horror flooded her face. She scrambled backward, the knife clattering to the floor. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry I didn't. He grabbed me and I just—" Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline and fear mixing into tremors she couldn't control. Gideon sat up slowly, rubbing his throat where the knife had pressed. "What the hell?" "I'm sorry," Marnie repeated. She looked at Tobias, then at Gideon, then at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Thomas taught me. He said a wife should know how to defend his property when he wasn't home. He taught me knife work, basic holds. I never wanted to use it like this." Tobias helped Gideon to his feet. "You all right?" "Yeah," Gideon muttered. He looked at Marnie with new wariness, but also perhaps a grudging respect. "You could have hurt me bad. I know. I'm sorry. You said that already." He picked up the knife, studied it, then handed it back to her. "Keep it. Might need it for more than just scaring off stupid men asking stupid questions." It was the closest thing to an apology he could offer, and Marnie took it as such. She accepted the knife, folded it, and tucked it back wherever she'd hidden it. Verla appeared in the doorway, her eyes moving between them. "What happened?" "Misunderstanding," Tobias said quickly. "Everyone's fine," but Verla knew her sons, and she knew fear when she saw it. She looked at Marnie, really looked at her, and for the first time saw past the bruises and the fear to something harder beneath. This girl had survived something terrible and learned to protect herself in the process. That kind of survival came at a cost. "Marnie, come help me with something," Verla said gently. Outside, Marnie followed her into the cold. They walked a short distance from the cabin, far enough that their voices wouldn't carry. Snow crunched beneath their feet. "You want to tell me what really happened?" Verla asked. "He wanted to see my locket. I said no. He tried to take it. I reacted like someone trained to fight." Marnie was quiet for a long moment. "Then Thomas was afraid of everything. Thieves, rivals, men he'd cheated in business. So he taught me how to use a knife, how to throw a punch, how to break holds. Said I needed to protect his house when he traveled. But really," her voice broke slightly, "really, I think he liked knowing I could defend myself just enough to make him feel powerful when he hurt me anyway. Like he was so strong even my training couldn't stop him. The cruelty of it, teaching his wife to fight just so defeating her would be more satisfying, made Verla's stomach turn. "The locket," Verla said. "What's in it that you'd fight for it like that?" Marnie's hand went to it automatically. She was silent so long, Verla thought she wouldn't answer. Then she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a tiny photograph, so small, Verla had to squint to see it. A baby, maybe 3 months old. Dark hair, solemn eyes. "My daughter," Marnie whispered. "Her name was Grace. She lived 6 months. Thomas, he said it was fever. But I know he did something. I was only allowed to hold her certain hours. He controlled when she ate, how she was dressed, everything. And then one morning she wouldn't wake up. The doctor said fever, but there were no signs. No sickness before. She was just gone." Tears streamed down Marnie's face now, freezing in the cold. "I have nothing else of her. No lock of hair. No blanket. Nothing but this picture. It's all I have left of the only person who was truly mine. So yes, I'd fight for it. I'd kill for it." Verla pulled Marnie into her arms, holding her while she sobbed, deep, wrenching sounds that seemed torn from somewhere ancient and wounded. When the storm passed, Marnie pulled away, wiping her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry I scared Gideon. He'll survive. Might have even learned something." Verla paused. "Does Thomas know you have the locket?" "No, I kept it hidden. He didn't know the picture existed. I had it made in secret, paid for with money I earned selling eggs. If he'd known—" She closed the locket carefully. "He would have destroyed it, just to show he could." They stood in the snow, 2 women bound by the understanding that some men measured their power by how much they could take from those who couldn't fight back. "Come on," Verla said finally. "It's too cold to stay out here, and you need to eat something. Crying like that takes it out of you." They returned to the cabin, where an uneasy peace had settled. Gideon nodded to Marnie, not quite friendly, but no longer hostile. Tobias made coffee. Opal, who'd heard everything from her corner, simply patted the chair beside her when Marnie passed. "Sit, child. Tell me about your Grace. What did she look like?" And Marnie, perhaps for the first time since her daughter's death, talked about her baby. Not to Thomas, who'd forbidden mentions of her after the burial. Not to servants, who'd averted their eyes when she grieved. But to an old woman who understood that some losses never healed, only learned to coexist with living. Outside, snow began falling again. Inside, something shifted. They were no longer strangers sharing space. They were becoming something more dangerous and more powerful. They were becoming family. The nights were hardest. During the day, activity provided distraction, chores and lessons, and the simple business of survival. But at night, when the fire burned low and the cabin settled into creaking darkness, memory had free rein. Marnie's nightmares woke them all at least twice a week. She'd cry out in her sleep, thrashing against invisible attackers, and Verla would have to shake her awake gently, murmuring reassurances until the terror faded from her eyes. On one such night, 2 weeks after her arrival, Verla gave up on sleep entirely. She made tea and sat by the fire, her rifle across her lap, a habit from years of living alone in wild country. The rifle was old but well-maintained, a gift from her second husband before he died. It had protected her from bears, wolves, and once a man who'd thought a widow alone would be easy prey. He'd learned otherwise, and left with a limp he'd carry the rest of his days. Marnie emerged from her tangle of quilts, drawn by the tea smell. She poured herself a cup without asking, and sat across from Verla, her face pale in the firelight. "I'm sorry I keep waking everyone," she said quietly. "Can't help what you dream. Thomas used to hit me when I had nightmares. Said I was doing it for attention. After a while, I learned to wake myself up before making noise. I thought I'd gotten good at it." Verla studied the rifle in her lap, running her hand along the smooth wood of the stock. "You know how to shoot?" "Thomas taught me. Along with the knife work. Said I needed to be able to defend the house. But not yourself. Never myself. That would have been rebellion." Marnie sipped her tea. "He had rules about everything. How I dressed, how I spoke, who I talked to. I couldn't leave the house without permission. Couldn't write letters without him reading them first. Every moment of my life was his to control. How long were you married?" 14 months. Married at 18, trapped by 19, running at 19 and a half? She laughed bitterly. My mother said I was lucky to catch such a wealthy husband. Said girls like me, plain, poor, nobody special, didn't get chances like Thomas Garrison. She made me promise to be grateful. You were a child. I thought I was grown. I thought marriage meant partnership, companionship. I thought, her voice broke, I thought I'd be safe. My father drank, and when he drank, he got mean. Thomas was sober, successful, respectful during our courtship. I thought anything was better than watching my mother flinch every time a door opened. And instead, you got a different kind of mean, the calculated kind. The kind that never leaves marks where people can see. The kind that makes you doubt your own mind. Marnie wrapped her hands around her cup, seeking warmth. He'd tell me I'd said things I never said, done things I never did, misplaced things, and then accuse me of hiding them. I started writing everything down, keeping track of conversations, just so I could hold on to reality. And even then, he'd make me feel crazy. Verla had heard stories like this before. Mountain women shared histories in whispers while men worked outside. Tales passed like warnings from one generation to the next. But hearing it from Marnie, seeing the evidence written on her skin, made it real in a way stories never quite achieved. I was married twice, Verla said after a long silence. First time to Gideon's father. He was handsome and charming and had a mean streak a mile wide. Beat me for burning dinner, for talking back, for looking at him wrong. I was 17, same as most girls get married. Thought it was normal. Thought I deserved it somehow. When did you leave? When I realized he'd kill me eventually. It was that simple. He came home drunk one night and put his hands around my throat, squeezed until I couldn't breathe. I saw my death in his eyes, clear as day. He let go at the last second, laughed about it, passed out on the floor. I packed what I could carry, took his rifle, and walked out. I was 3 months pregnant with Tobias. Marnie leaned forward. He didn't come after you? Oh, he tried. Tracked me for 2 weeks. But I knew country, and he didn't. I lost him in the mountains, ended up here. This cabin belonged to a trapper then, old man named Josiah. He let me stay, taught me to survive. When he died, he left me the cabin in his will. Said I'd earned it by then. And your second husband? Verla's face softened. Jacob. Met him 5 years after leaving the first. He was a logger, quiet man, gentle. We had Gideon together. He died of consumption when Gideon was 8. But those years with him, they were good years. He showed me not all men were like Gideon's father. You were lucky to find him. Luck had nothing to do with it. I chose carefully. Watched how he treated animals, how he spoke to people he didn't need anything from. And I made sure I could leave if I had to. Always kept my own money hidden, my own plans. Never again would I be trapped. They sat in companionable silence. 2 women bound by the understanding that survival sometimes meant running, sometimes meant hiding, and sometimes, if you were very lucky or very stubborn, meant building something new from nothing. Thomas's mother tried to warn me, Marnie said eventually, before the wedding. She pulled me aside, said something like, marriage is a long road, and some roads are harder than others. At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic. Now I know she was trying to save me without saying the words outright. The woman I delivered for, Verla said slowly. The one who told me to save myself. That was Thomas's mother? Must have been. She died shortly after we married. The fall down the stairs. It wasn't a fall. No, I found her diary after, hidden behind a loose board, in what became my room. She documented everything. Her husband's abuse, Thomas's growing violence, attempts to leave that were stopped by money or threats or both. The last entry was dated 2 days before she died. She wrote, I've decided to take the ledger to the territorial judge. Even if it costs me everything, I can't let this continue. Thomas is becoming his father, and I won't let him destroy another generation of women. Verla felt cold, despite the fire. She was going to expose them. And she died before she could. Benjamin Garrison, Thomas's father, was still alive then. Between them, they controlled half the county. Judges, sheriffs, business owners, everyone owed them money or favors or fear. One woman with a diary was no match for that kind of power. What happened to the diary? Thomas burned it. At least he thought he did. He held what he believed was her diary in the parlor fireplace while I watched. Told me it was a lesson about what happens to women who can't be loyal. But his mother had been smarter than he knew. She'd made a copy, kept the original in a different hiding place. I found it the week before I ran. Verla sat up straighter. You have it? The real diary? Marnie nodded slowly. Hidden in my things. That's what I really took when I left. Not just jewelry and money. Evidence, names, dates, accounts of violence going back 30 years. 2 generations of garrison men hurting women and using their power to cover it up. If that diary became public, it would destroy them. It would give women a chance. Other women trapped like I was, like Thomas's mother was. It would show the pattern, prove it's not isolated incidents or accidents or women being dramatic. It's systematic, intentional, murder hidden as misfortune. That's what Thomas is really searching for, Verla said, understanding crystallizing. Not you. The diary. He knows I found something. He was tearing apart the house the night I left looking for it. But he doesn't know I took it with me. He probably thinks it's still hidden somewhere in his house. That's why the wanted poster says theft. He can't admit what was really stolen without explaining why it matters so much. Does he know you know how to read and write? He thinks I can barely read. I let him believe I was uneducated. It made him underestimate me. But my mother taught me letters before she married my father. I've read more books than Thomas ever will. I just read them in secret. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Opal stirred in her corner, murmured something in her sleep, then settled. Verla kept her voice low. If you have that diary, you're more dangerous to Thomas than he realizes. You're not just a runaway wife. You're a threat to everything his family has built. I know. That's why I can't stay here. Come spring, I need to keep moving. Get the diary somewhere safe, somewhere it can do damage even if something happens to me. Or, Verla said slowly, you could use it first. Make copies. Send them to newspapers, judges who aren't in the garrison's pocket, women's groups back east. Spread the information so far and wide that Thomas can't suppress it all. Marnie's eyes widened. That would take time, money, help. You've got time until the snow melts. As for money and help, Verla gestured around the cabin. You're not alone anymore. I can't ask you to risk. You're not asking. I'm offering, and I've got reasons of my own. That woman I delivered for, Thomas's mother, she was kind to me. Paid me extra, slipped me dried meat and flour when Jacob was sick and we were struggling. She saw me as a person, not just hired help. If she died trying to stop what her husband and son were doing, then helping you finish what she started feels like paying a debt. Marnie's hands were shaking, tea sloshing in her cup. This is bigger than running away. This is war, Verla finished. Quiet war fought with words and evidence instead of guns. But war all the same. And here's what I've learned about war. You don't win by running forever. You win by making a stand. Thomas has money, influence, armed men. And we have truth, evidence, and nothing left to lose. Sometimes that's enough. They talked deep into the night, planning in whispers, considering possibilities. By the time dawn grayed the windows, they had the beginnings of a strategy. Tobias would need to be told. His trips to town made him their only reliable contact with the outside world. Gideon, too, though his cooperation was less certain. And they'd need to keep Marnie's possession of the diary absolutely secret until they were ready to act. When the men woke, Verla made breakfast while Marnie helped Opal dress. The old woman's hands shook more each day, arthritis settling into her joints like frost, but her mind remained sharp. You two were up late, Opal observed as Marnie buttoned her dress. Plotting, I expect. Planning, Marnie corrected gently. Same thing, just sounds prettier. Opal patted Marnie's hand. I knew another girl who tried to fight back once. Catherine, the one I mentioned before. She had evidence too. Letters from Benjamin Garrison, promises he'd made and broken. Thought she could use them to force him to leave her alone. What happened? She ended up dead at the bottom of Miller's Gorge. Benjamin said her horse spooked. The sheriff agreed. The letters disappeared. Opal's faded eyes met Marnie's. But times are changing. More folks willing to question men like the Garrisons now. More women finding their voices. Maybe this time will be different. I hope so. Hope's good. Planning's better. And having angry women on your side is best of all. Opal smiled, showing gaps where teeth had been. I may be old, but I remember things. Things that might be useful. Names of other women Benjamin hurt. Families who lost daughters and never got answers. You want witnesses to a pattern? I can help you find them. Marnie embraced the old woman carefully, mindful of fragile bones. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Thomas Garrison is ruined and you're free. Until then, we've got work to do. At breakfast, Verla explained the situation to her sons. Not everything, but enough. Tobias listened with his usual quiet attention, his eyes moving between his mother and Marnie. Gideon's expression was harder to read, shifting between concern and calculation. So she's got evidence that could destroy the Garrisons, Gideon said finally. And you want to help her use it? Yes, Verla said simply. That's not hiding someone until they can move on. That's picking a fight with the richest, most powerful family in the territory. It is. They'll come after us. They might. Gideon looked at Marnie. This is worth dying for to you? Marnie held his gaze. It's worth risking death to stop men like Thomas from hurting anyone else. If I run and hide, he just finds another victim. If I do nothing, the pattern continues. But if I fight back, if we fight back, maybe we save someone. Maybe we stop it. Maybe we all get killed. Maybe, but at least we'll have tried. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the table. I need to think. He left and they let him go. Tobias remained, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. I'll help, he said. Whatever you need. I can carry messages, make copies, spread information. I know people in 3 counties who'd listen if the evidence is solid enough. It is, Marnie assured him. Then we've got a chance. Tobias looked at his mother. You sure about this? I've never been sure about anything in my life, Verla admitted. But it feels right. And sometimes that's enough to act on. Outside, snow fell steadily, winter's grip still unbroken. But inside the cabin something had shifted. They were no longer just sheltering a fugitive. They were preparing for battle. 3 weeks into Marnie's stay, as February deepened into the coldest part of winter, she found something that changed everything. She'd been reading from Verla's small collection of books, mostly practical texts on medicine and childbirth, a few novels with worn covers, a Bible with water-stained pages. One afternoon, while Verla was teaching her to prepare a poultice for inflammation, Marnie pulled out a slim volume on herbal remedies, and a folded piece of paper fell from between its pages. The paper was old, the ink faded to brown, the edges brittle. Marnie picked it up carefully and began to read. As the words registered, her face went pale. Verla, she said quietly, you need to see this. Verla wiped her hands and took the paper. It was a letter, written in a woman's careful hand. To whoever finds this, my name is Catherine Brennan. I'm writing this in March of 1859, in the cabin where I've found refuge from Benjamin Garrison. If you're reading this, it means I didn't survive to finish what I started. Benjamin is a dangerous man. He keeps women like possessions and discards them when they no longer serve him. I have evidence, letters, accounts, names of others he's hurt. I hid them in the root cellar, beneath the floorboards on the north side, wrapped in oilcloth. Please, if you find this, finish what I couldn't. Make sure he answers for what he's done. I don't expect to live to see spring. He knows where I am. I've seen his men watching the mountain trails. But maybe my death won't be for nothing if someone finds this letter and acts on it. God forgive me for not being brave enough sooner. Catherine Brennan. The letter trembled in Verla's hands. She remembered Catherine vaguely, a quiet woman who'd stayed one winter, then vanished. Verla had assumed she'd moved on, gone west or back east. But Catherine had known she was being hunted. Had known and tried to leave evidence behind. The root cellar, Marnie said. Do you have one? Under the cabin. Haven't used it in years. The entrance is half buried, and I store most things in the main room now. Verla looked at Marnie, understanding dawning. You think the evidence is still there? It's been 15 years. It might be gone, destroyed by moisture or animals. But if it's wrapped in oilcloth like she said, it might have survived. Verla set the letter down carefully. We need to check, but we'll have to wait for the men to be out. If there's something down there, I don't want Gideon knowing about it until we understand what we're dealing with. 2 days later, the opportunity came. Tobias and Gideon left together to check trap lines that had been snowed under, a task that would take most of the day. Opal was napping by the fire. Verla and Marnie bundled themselves against the cold and went outside. The root cellar entrance was on the north side of the cabin, just as Catherine's letter had indicated. Snow had drifted against it, and ice made the wooden door difficult to pry open. They worked in silence, their breath fogging in the frigid air, until finally the door gave way with a groan of protesting hinges. The cellar beneath was dark and smelled of earth and old stone. Verla climbed down first, carrying a lantern with Marnie following. The space was small, barely 8 feet square, with a dirt floor and stone walls. Shelves lined one side, empty now except for broken pottery and the desiccated remains of root vegetables from years past. North side, Marnie said, pointing. They examined the floor carefully, looking for disturbances in the packed earth. In the far corner, Verla found what she was searching for, a section where the dirt looked slightly different, as if it had been dug up and replaced. They knelt and began scraping away earth with their hands, digging carefully. 6 inches down, Marnie's fingers hit something that wasn't dirt. Here, they cleared away more earth, revealing a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. The cloth was stained and brittle but intact. Verla lifted it out reverently, as if handling something sacred, which, in a way, it was. This was Catherine's last testimony, her final attempt to be heard. Back in the cabin, with Opal watching from her chair, they unwrapped the bundle on the table. Inside were letters, perhaps 20 of them, along with a small leather-bound notebook. The letters were in various hands, some educated and careful, others rough and barely literate. But all told similar stories. Benjamin Garrison promising marriage, then abandoning women when they became pregnant. Benjamin Garrison offering work, then demanding payment in forms other than money. Benjamin Garrison buying silence with threats or small sums, making problems disappear through intimidation or worse, and the notebook, Catherine's meticulous record of everything she'd witnessed and experienced. Dates, names, descriptions. A chronicle of systematic predation spanning more than a decade. He was doing to multiple women what Thomas does to one, Marnie said, reading through the entries. He kept several women on rotation, servants, tenants, anyone vulnerable, made promises, then broke them. And when they complained or threatened exposure, they disappeared, Verla finished. Or had accidents, or moved away suddenly. She looked at the letters spread across her table. This is what Catherine died trying to preserve. Evidence that the Garrisons have been doing this for generations, combined with what Thomas's mother documented about her own abuse and what I can testify about Thomas. Marnie's voice grew stronger. This isn't just one woman's story that can be dismissed. This is a pattern, proof of decades of violence. Opal leaned forward, her old eyes sharp. I remember some of these names. Anna McCormick. She worked at the Garrison house, must have been 1857 or so. Disappeared one night, and Benjamin said she'd stolen silver and run off. But her mother swore Anna would never leave without saying goodbye. And there was Mary something I can't recall, who was found drowned in the creek. Ruled accidental. But folks whispered she'd been pregnant, and Benjamin was the father. It's all here, Marnie said, touching the notebook. Catherine was thorough. She interviewed other women, collected their stories. She was building a case, and Benjamin found out and killed her for it, Verla said grimly. Just like his son killed his own mother for trying the same thing. Just like Thomas would kill you if he knew what you had. They sat in heavy silence, surrounded by the testimony of dead women. Voices that had been silenced, but not quite erased. Catherine had managed, through sheer determination and foresight, to preserve what Benjamin had tried to destroy. We need to combine these, Marnie said finally. Catherine's evidence, Thomas's mother's diary, my testimony, put it all together into something undeniable. That'll take time, Verla said. Careful copying, organization, preparation. And we'll need to move fast once we start, before Thomas realizes what we're doing. How long until the snow melts enough for someone to get up the mountain? 6 weeks, maybe 8. Depends on the weather. Then that's how long we have to prepare. Marnie looked at the letters, then at Verla. We should make multiple copies. Send them to different newspapers, different judges, different law enforcement offices. Spread the information so widely that even if some copies are suppressed, others will get through. Verla nodded. Tobias can help with distribution. He knows people across 3 territories, owes no loyalty to the garrisons. And he's trustworthy. He'll do this right. What about Gideon? Gideon's coming around. He's scared, but he's got a sense of justice buried under all that fear. Once he sees this evidence, once he understands the scope of what we're dealing with, he'll help, or at least he won't hinder us. They spent the rest of the afternoon carefully repacking Catherine's evidence in the oilcloth, then hiding it in a new location, under a loose board in Verla's room, wrapped in cloth that looked like spare bedding. When the men returned that evening, cold and tired and empty-handed again, nothing seemed different. They ate supper, tended to evening chores, settled for sleep, but everything had changed. Catherine's voice had reached across 15 years, connecting past to present, joining her fight to Marnie's. The evidence was no longer fragmentary. It was building into something substantial, something that might actually succeed where individual women had failed. That night, as Marnie lay by the fire, she thought about all the women who'd tried to escape the garrisons. Catherine, Thomas's mother, the servant girl Josephine, others whose names appeared in the letters and notebook. Each one had fought alone, isolated by shame and fear, and the social order that told them men's violence was private, tolerable, unremarkable. But what if they fought together? What if their voices, collected and amplified, became too loud to ignore? The next morning, a stranger appeared. Tobias saw him first, a figure on horseback emerging from the tree line, moving slowly through deep snow. He called out a warning, and everyone rushed to the windows. The rider was bundled against the cold, face obscured by a scarf. But even from a distance, they could tell he was searching for something, his head moving side to side, studying the terrain. Get away from the window, Verla ordered Marnie, who immediately retreated to the shadows. The rider approached the cabin, but stopped a good distance away, perhaps sensing the reception might be hostile. He called out, his voice muffled by fabric but audible. "Hello, the house. I'm looking for information." Verla grabbed her rifle and opened the door a crack. "State your business." "Name's Cooper. Hired by Thomas Garrison to locate his missing wife." The man pulled down his scarf, revealing a weathered face and graying beard. "I mean no trouble, just asking if you've seen a young woman traveling alone." "Haven't seen anyone," Verla called back. "Bounton's been locked down for weeks. Mind if I look around your property?" "I'll pay for the trouble." "I do mind. This is private land, and I don't appreciate strangers." Cooper studied the cabin, his eyes moving across the windows, the smoke rising from the chimney, the paths tramped through snow. "You're Verla Deeks, the midwife." "I am. I've heard you're a good woman. A fair woman. So I'm asking fair. If you've seen Marnie Garrison, or if you're sheltering her, you should know that her husband just wants her back. He's offering good money, no questions asked. She's not in trouble. He just wants to talk. If I'd seen her, I'd tell you," Verla lied smoothly. "But I haven't, and even if I had, I wouldn't send a woman back to a man who put bruises on her." Cooper's expression flickered, surprise, maybe respect. "So you do know something. I know what bruises mean. And I know when a man's more interested in property than in his wife's welfare. Now get off my land before I shoot your horse out from under you." Cooper raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "No need for that, I'll go. But I'll be back this way once the snow clears. If you change your mind, or if you see her, there's a reward." "Not interested." He nodded, pulled his scarf back up, and turned his horse away. They watched until he disappeared into the trees, the sound of hoofbeats fading. Verla closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Behind her, Marnie had gone white as the snow outside. "He knows I'm here," Marnie whispered. "He suspects." "Suspecting isn't knowing," Verla said. "And he's got no authority to search without the sheriff. I'll send word to town. Make sure the sheriff knows we're not to be bothered without cause." Thomas will keep sending people. He won't stop. Then we work faster. Make those copies, prepare the evidence, get it distributed before Thomas can find you and silence you." Verla set her rifle by the door. Catherine tried to wait for the perfect moment. Thomas's mother tried to wait until she had everything perfectly documented. They both died waiting. "We're not going to make that mistake." Gideon spoke up from his corner. "I'll help, whatever you need." I didn't understand before, but he gestured toward the door Cooper had just left through. "A man who hires bounty hunters to find his wife isn't a man who deserves to get her back," Tobias nodded. "Tell us what to do. We'll do it." Marnie looked around at these people, this family who'd taken her in, protected her, chosen to stand with her against overwhelming odds. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank us yet," Verla replied. "Save that for when this is over and you're free. Now, let's get to work." They gathered around the table, and Marnie retrieved Thomas's mother's diary from its hiding place. A slim book she'd kept strapped to her body since leaving the garrison house. Combined with Catherine's letters and notebook, they had the foundation of something powerful, something that might finally bring the garrisons to justice. Outside, snow continued falling. But inside the cabin, 5 people began the careful work of copying decades of testimony, preparing to amplify voices that had been silenced. The war was beginning. The copying work consumed them. Every evening after chores, they gathered around the table by lamplight, taking turns transcribing the letters and diary entries into clean copies. Marnie's handwriting was the finest, so she took the lead, while Verla prepared fresh ink and Tobias cut and prepared paper. Even Gideon contributed. Though his letters were crude, he copied simpler documents, while the others handled the more complex testimonies. Opal, despite her trembling hands, proved invaluable in a different way. She sat by the fire and talked, reaching into decades of memory to add context to the names in Catherine's notebook. "Elizabeth Hartwell," she said one evening, as Marnie copied a letter signed with that name. "I remember her. Worked in the garrison kitchen. This would have been 1856, maybe 57. Pretty girl, maybe 16. One day she was there, next day gone. Benjamin said she'd stolen from him, run off to join family in California. But her sister lived right here in Stillwater, and she never heard a word. Do you remember what she looked like?" Marnie asked. "Tall for a woman. Red hair, freckles. Had a nervous way of laughing, like she was always apologizing for taking up space." Marnie made notes in the margins of her copy. "If we can find her sister, get testimony that Elizabeth never contacted family, that's more evidence the disappearances weren't voluntary. Her sister's name was Anne. She married a farmer named Whitley, moved up near Copper Creek, might still be there. I can ride that way once the snow breaks," Tobias said. "Talk to people, collect statements. If even half these disappearances can be verified—" "It's not just disappearances," Marnie interrupted, her finger on a particular passage in Thomas's mother's diary. "Listen to this. February 1868. Thomas broke my wrist tonight because I questioned his treatment of young Alice, the new parlor maid. He twisted my arm until I heard the bone snap, then told the doctor I'd fallen on the ice. Dr. Whitmore knew. I could see it in his eyes. But he said nothing. He never does. Benjamin pays him too well for honesty." "Dr. Whitmore is still practicing in Stillwater," Verla said grimly. "Still taking garrison money, I expect." "There's more." Marnie turned pages, finding another entry. "March 1868. Alice has disappeared. Thomas says she quit without notice, but I found blood on the parlor floor that the servants couldn't explain. When I asked Thomas about it, he told me to mind my own business unless I wanted to take a fall myself. I understand now what happened to Benjamin's first wife. They said she fell down the stairs while he was away. But Benjamin is never truly away. He has eyes and hands everywhere. And a woman who knows too much doesn't need to wait for her husband to be present to meet with an accident." The cabin was silent except for the fire's crackle. Even Gideon had stopped his copying, his face troubled. "She knew," Verla said quietly. "She knew Thomas was killing women, knew Benjamin had killed before him. She documented it all and still couldn't escape. Because she was alone, Marnie said. Because she thought she had to be perfect, had to have irrefutable proof before she could act. By the time she'd gathered enough evidence, they were watching her too closely. She couldn't get the diary out of the house without them knowing. But you did, Tobias pointed out, because I learned from her mistakes. I didn't wait for perfection. I grabbed what I could and ran. Marnie's hand went to the locket at her throat, the one holding her daughter's picture. And because I had nothing left to lose, Grace was dead. My spirit was dying. If I'd stayed another month, I wouldn't have had the strength to leave at all. Verla reached for a particular letter from Catherine's collection, one she'd set aside earlier because it troubled her. She unfolded it now, pressing the creases flat. This one's different from the others, she said. It's addressed to Catherine directly, dated March 1859. Same month Catherine wrote her letter. Listen, dear Catherine, I hope this reaches you before Benjamin does. I heard from Mary's mother that you're asking questions about what happened to her. Please stop. I know you mean well, but you don't understand what you're dealing with. Benjamin Garrison has powerful friends, the sheriff, the judge, half the town council. He's destroyed women who challenged him before, and he'll destroy you too. Take my advice, run as far as you can and don't look back. Some fights can't be won. With sympathy, Mrs. Adelaide Foster. Did Catherine run? Marnie asked. Obviously not, Opal said from her corner. She stayed, tried to fight, and died for it. Adelaide Foster was right about one thing, Gideon said reluctantly. The Garrisons do have powerful friends. We can send all the copies we want to newspapers and judges. But if those judges are in Benjamin and Thomas's pockets, they'll bury the evidence same as they've buried it before. Then we send it to people who aren't in their pockets, Marnie said firmly. Territorial officials in the capital. Newspapers in San Francisco and Denver, big enough that Garrison money can't silence them. Women's reform groups back east. We spread it so wide that even if some copies disappear, enough will get through to cause damage. That takes coordination, Tobias said, and trust. We'll need people willing to carry documents, willing to risk Garrison retaliation. I know some people, Verla said slowly. Other midwives scattered across the territory. We've got our own network, women helping women, sharing information that men don't hear. They'd help with this. Some of them have their own grievances against the Garrisons. Over the following week, their strategy took shape. They would create 10 complete copies of the compiled evidence, Catherine's letters and notebook, Thomas's mother's diary, Marnie's testimony. Each copy would be sent to a different recipient, territorial officials, newspapers, law offices, reform organizations. They'd also prepare a shorter summary document, a one-page account of the pattern, with the most damning quotes highlighted, that could be distributed more widely to townspeople, posted publicly, spread by word of mouth. Tobias would handle some deliveries personally, writing to contacts he trusted. Verla would use her midwife network for others. They'd send some copies by mail from different towns to avoid establishing a pattern, and they'd time everything to arrive simultaneously, preventing the Garrisons from suppressing information before it spread. But the work was slow. Marnie's hand cramped from hours of writing. Ink ran low, requiring Verla to make more from oak galls and iron. Paper was scarce. They used every scrap they could find, even tearing blank pages from Verla's few books to create more writing surface. And time was running out. The weather was shifting. The brutal cold of February was giving way to March's unpredictable thaws. Soon the snow would break, trails would open, and Thomas's hired men would be able to search more freely. On the last day of February, another rider appeared. Not Cooper this time, but a trapper they knew slightly, a man named Hutchins who ran lines farther up the mountain. "Thought you should know," he told Tobias at the door, refusing to come inside. "There's men asking questions in town, not just about a missing woman anymore. Now they're asking about witnesses, about anyone who might be hiding her or helping her. They're offering serious money, and times are hard enough that folks are considering talking, even if they don't know anything." "Meaning what?" Tobias asked. "Meaning someone's going to mention that the Deeks' cabin is up this way, that your mother takes in strays sometimes, That you're the kind of family that might harbor a fugitive out of principle. Hutchins glanced over Tobias's shoulder toward the cabin interior. I don't know if you're helping that girl or not, and I don't want to know. But if you are, you should be aware. Thomas Garrison himself is in Stillwater now, staying at the hotel, conducting interviews personally. He's determined, and he's got resources most of us can't imagine. Appreciate the warning, Hutchins nodded. Your mother delivered both my children, saved my wife's life when the second one went wrong. I owe her, but that's all I can do, warn you. I can't stand against the Garrisons. Nobody can. We'll see about that, Tobias said quietly. After Hutchins left, they held a council. Thomas's presence in Stillwater meant the situation had escalated. He wasn't leaving this to hired men anymore. He was taking personal command of the search. We need to move faster, Marnie said, her face pale but determined. How many copies are complete? 4 full sets, Verla answered. 6 more in progress. That might have to be enough. If Thomas is in town, conducting interviews, it's only a matter of days before he focuses on this cabin. Cooper already suspects. Once Thomas hears about Cooper's visit, he'll come himself. Let him come, Gideon said, surprising everyone. He'd been quiet during most of their planning, contributing but not leading. Now his voice held a hard edge. We've got rifles. We're on our own property. He's got no legal right to enter without the sheriff, and the sheriff's a coward who won't climb this mountain in March snow. Thomas doesn't care about legal rights, Marnie said. He'll come with his men and take what he wants. That's how he operates. Then we make sure he doesn't find what he's looking for, Verla said. We finish the copies we can finish in the next 3 days. Then we distribute them immediately, before Thomas gets here. Once the evidence is distributed, it doesn't matter if he finds us. The damage will already be done. 3 days isn't enough time. It has to be. They worked through the night, all of them. Even Opal, who couldn't write but could fold papers, prepare envelopes, organize documents. The cabin became a factory of testimony, each person focused on their task, driven by the knowledge that time was collapsing around them. By the morning of March 3rd, they had 7 complete sets of evidence. Not the 10 they'd planned, but enough. Tobias prepared to leave immediately, carrying 3 sets to be delivered to different newspapers and a territorial judge he'd served with during the war. A man he trusted absolutely. Before he left, he pulled Marnie aside. If Thomas comes while I'm gone, we'll handle it. I mean it. If things go wrong, if he tries to take you by force, don't let him. You understand? Marnie touched the knife she now kept in her belt. I understand. Mas taught you to shoot? Yes. Good. Use the rifle if you have to. There's no shame in protecting yourself. I know. She looked at this man who'd become something like a brother to her. Be careful, Tobias. Thomas's reach is long. So is justice, if we're lucky. He mounted Temperance, the saddlebags heavy with documents that could destroy a dynasty. I'll be back in 4 days. 5 at most. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. That's my line, Gideon called from the door. Tobias smiled, touched his hat, and rode down the mountain. They watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then Verla turned to the others. Now we wait, and we prepare. If Thomas comes, he'll find we're not helpless women waiting to be rescued or punished. We're ready. But as Marnie looked at the remaining sets of evidence stacked on the table, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down. How many women had tried this before? How many had believed they could win against men with money and power and violence? And how many had died trying? She touched the locket at her throat, feeling Grace's tiny face preserved in silver and memory. "This is for you," she whispered. "And for every girl who won't have to grow up in a world where men like your father are untouchable." Outside, the snow was melting. Icicles dripped from the eaves. The world was opening up again, and with it, all the dangers they'd held at bay through winter's isolation were coming closer. On the second day after Tobias's departure, as Marnie was helping Verla grind herbs for a cough remedy, she made a decision. She disappeared into Verla's room and emerged with something wrapped in cloth, something she'd kept hidden even from the people sheltering her. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, setting the bundle on the table. "Something I need to show you before Thomas comes." Verla wiped her hands and sat down. Gideon looked up from the trap he was repairing. Even Opal leaned forward in her chair, eyes sharp with interest. Marnie unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing not just Thomas's mother's diary, which they'd been copying from, but a second book. This one was smaller, bound in dark leather, its pages filled with cramped handwriting. Thomas's mother didn't just document her own abuse, Marnie said quietly. She documented everything. Business dealings, bribes, political arrangements. Every corrupt transaction Benjamin and Thomas ever made. Every official they bought. Every witness they silenced. Every woman they hurt. She opened the book to a random page. This isn't just a diary. It's a ledger of crimes going back 30 years. Verla reached for the book with trembling hands. The entry Marnie had opened to read, May 1867. Benjamin paid Sheriff Morton $500 to close investigation into Anna Whitfield's disappearance. Told him she'd run off to Portland. But I saw Anna's trunk in the attic last week, still packed with her things. Women who run away don't leave everything behind. Sheriff knows this but prefers Benjamin's money to truth. My God, Verla breathed. Marnie turned more pages, each one revealing another calculated transaction, another purchased silence. There are names here, dozens of them. Sheriffs, judges, town councilmen, business partners. Anyone Thomas and Benjamin needed in their pocket, they bought. And she recorded it all. Why? Gideon asked. Why document this if she couldn't use it? Insurance at first. I think she hoped if they knew she had evidence, they'd leave her alone. But they found out she was keeping records, and that's when she became a liability. The fall down the stairs wasn't an accident. It was an assassination. Marnie's voice hardened. She knew it was coming. The last entry is dated the day before she died. She wrote, I've decided to hide this ledger where Thomas will never find it. If something happens to me, perhaps someone braver will find it and finish what I couldn't. The midwife knows the truth about this family. Maybe she'll have more courage than I did. Verla felt cold. She meant me. She was hoping I'd find this. She hid it in the wall behind a loose brick in what became my room. I found it by accident. I was cold one night and noticed a draft. When I investigated, there was the brick easily removed, and behind it this ledger along with her personal diary. Marnie looked at each of them. This is what Thomas is really afraid of. Not the diary, that's personal, emotional, could be dismissed as the ravings of an unhappy wife. But this ledger, this is evidence of systematic corruption, criminal conspiracy. If this becomes public, it doesn't just destroy Thomas's reputation, it destroys half the power structure in 3 counties. That's why he's so desperate to find you, Verla said. You're not just a runaway wife. You're carrying evidence that could bring down dozens of powerful men. Exactly. And those men have resources, connections, reasons to see me dead. Marnie turned to a marked page. Look at this entry from 1870. Thomas arranged for Judge Henshaw to dismiss charges against him in the matter of Josephine Shaw's disappearance. Payment, $2,000 plus share in timber contract. Henshaw agreed to rule her death accidental drowning despite evidence of violence. Dr. Whitmore provided false autopsy report in exchange for his gambling debts being forgiven. Gideon swore under his breath. So the judge, the doctor, the sheriff, they're all complicit. Not just complicit, they're co-conspirators with as much to lose as Thomas does. Marnie closed the ledger carefully. That's why I was terrified to use this. It's not just fighting Thomas, it's fighting everyone he's bought. Every authority figure who's supposed to protect people has been purchased or compromised. Then we can't rely on local authorities, Verla said. We already knew that, but this confirms it. It's worse than that. Marnie's voice dropped. Some of the names in this ledger, they're not just local. There's a territorial senator who took bribes to influence land deals. A federal marshal who accepted payment to ignore evidence. The corruption goes higher than I imagined. Opal spoke up from her corner, her voice thin but clear. Then you send that ledger to someone who can't be bought. Someone outside the territory. Someone whose reputation depends on exposing exactly this kind of thing. Who? Gideon demanded. Everyone's got a price. Not everyone. Opal's eyes held a distant look, remembering. When I was young, there was a newspaper woman in San Francisco, Matilda Crane. She exposed corruption in the mining companies, nearly got killed for it. But she didn't stop. Last I heard, she was still writing, still fighting. She'd be 70 now if she's alive, but women like that don't give up. A woman journalist, Marnie said thoughtfully. Someone who'd understand why women's testimony matters. Someone who can't be dismissed as hysterical or biased. And someone far enough away that garrison money can't reach her easily, Verla added. We should have thought of this sooner. We didn't have all the pieces before, Marnie said. I was too scared to show you the ledger. I thought if people knew what I really had, they'd be too frightened to help me. Or they'd try to take it, use it for their own purposes. Why tell us now? Because Tobias is gone. Because Thomas is coming. Because if something happens to me, someone needs to know where the real evidence is and what to do with it. Marnie looked at Verla steadily. And because I trust you, all of you. You've risked everything for me without knowing the full story. You deserve to know what you're really protecting. Verla reached across the table and gripped Marnie's hand. Then we make copies of this too, as many as we can before Thomas arrives. And we make sure at least one copy gets to this Matilda Crane, or someone like her, someone who'll use it properly. They worked through the day and into the night, copying the most damning entries from the ledger. It was meticulous work. Names, dates, amounts had to be exact or the evidence would be challenged. Marnie's hand cramped painfully, but she pushed through, knowing each page copied was another nail in Thomas's coffin. By midnight, they had 2 complete copies of the ledger's most important entries. Not everything, that would take weeks, but enough to establish the pattern of corruption and name the key conspirators. We should hide the original somewhere else, Gideon said. Not here. If Thomas searches the cabin, I've already thought of that, Verla said. She looked at Marnie. There's a place. A cave about 2 miles up the mountain, hidden by deadfall. I used to hide there when my first husband was tracking me. He never found it. We could wrap the ledger in oilcloth, hide it there. Even if Thomas tears this cabin apart, he won't find it. When? Marnie asked. Tomorrow, first light. Before the trails get too soft from melting snow. They went to bed with plans in place, but sleep came hard. Marnie lay by the fire, staring at the flames, thinking about all the women whose names filled that ledger, not as victims this time, but as witnesses. Thomas's mother had done more than document her own suffering. She documented systemic evil, and in doing so, had created the weapon that might finally destroy it. Morning came grey and damp, the kind of weather that signaled spring's approach. Verla and Marnie prepared for the hike, bundling the ledger and its copies in multiple layers of oilcloth. Gideon insisted on coming with them. Protection, he said, though they all knew it was also because he didn't trust the woods after Cooper's visit. They left Opal alone in the cabin. The old woman settled by the fire, with Verla's rifle across her lap. Anyone comes while you're gone, I'll manage, she said calmly. The hike took an hour through melting snow and mud. The cave was exactly as Verla remembered, a narrow opening behind fallen logs, easy to miss unless you knew it was there. Inside, the air was dry and cold, undisturbed by weather. They found a crevice in the rock wall, deep enough to protect the oilcloth bundle from moisture and animals. No one will find this, Verla said with satisfaction, placing the original ledger in its hiding place. Even if Thomas searches for years. They were halfway back to the cabin when they heard it. Horses. Multiple riders, moving fast despite the difficult terrain. Verla grabbed Marnie's arm. Run! They ran, slipping in mud, branches catching at their clothes. Behind them, the sound of horses grew louder. Gideon dropped back, positioning himself between the women and pursuit, his rifle ready. They burst into the clearing just as riders emerged from the opposite side. 6 men on horseback, led by someone Marnie recognized instantly, despite the years and distance. Thomas Garrison sat his horse like a man born to command, tall, well-dressed even in traveling clothes, his face handsome in that cold, perfect way that had once deceived her into thinking she was lucky to have caught his attention. But his His eyes held the same flat emptiness she remembered, the look of someone who saw people as objects to be arranged or removed according to his convenience. "Marnie," he said, his voice pleasant and utterly devoid of warmth. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Marnie's hand went to the knife at her belt. Beside her, Verla raised her rifle. Gideon emerged from the trees behind them, his own rifle aimed at the riders. Thomas smiled, a terrible smile, the kind a cat gives before killing a mouse. "Now let's not be dramatic. I just want to talk to my wife, have a conversation about her unfortunate misunderstanding regarding what belongs to whom." "I'm not your wife anymore," Marnie said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'd rather die than go back to you." "That can be arranged," Thomas said mildly, "but it would be so much simpler if you just returned what you took. The jewelry, the money, and the book. Especially the book." So he knew. He knew she had the ledger. Marnie's mind raced, trying to understand how, and then she saw one of the riders behind Thomas. Cooper, the bounty hunter who'd visited before. He must have watched them longer than they realized, must have seen something that made him suspect they were hiding more than just a fugitive wife. "I don't have any book," Marnie lied. Thomas's smile widened. "Now we both know that's not true. My mother was very clever, but not clever enough. She thought she was documenting evidence. Really, she was writing her own death warrant. And now you're writing yours." He gestured to his men. "Search the cabin. Bring me anything that looks like a journal, letters, papers. And bring me Mrs. Deeks and her son as well. We're going to have a long conversation about the price of harboring fugitives." The riders dismounted, moving toward the cabin. Verla fired a warning shot over their heads. "This is private property. You've got no legal right." "Legal right?" Thomas laughed. "Mrs. Deeks, I own the sheriff, the judge, and half the territorial legislature. I don't need legal rights. I'm the law in this county." His eyes fixed on Marnie. "Last chance. Give me the ledger and you can go free. I'll even let these people live. Refuse, and I burn this cabin with everyone in it." Marnie looked at Verla, at Gideon, at the cabin where Opal waited. She thought of Tobias riding toward safety with copies of the evidence. She thought of all the women whose names filled that ledger, all the voices demanding to be heard. And she thought of Grace, her daughter who'd died because Thomas had wanted to hurt her one more time. "No," she said simply. Thomas's pleasant expression cracked, revealing the rage beneath. "Then you're all going to die." Starting with, the shot came from the cabin, clean, precise, dropping the man nearest the door. Opal's voice carried across the clearing, thin but fierce. "That's far enough. Next one goes through your employer's heart." Thomas's men froze. No one had expected resistance from an old woman alone in a cabin. But Opal had lived through Indian raids and outlaw attacks and winters that killed strong men. She wasn't easily frightened. "Call off your men," Verla said, her rifle steady on Thomas, "or my mother drops you where you sit." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thomas raised his hand slowly. "Stand down!" His men backed away from the cabin, confused and angry. Thomas's eyes never left Marnie. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "I'll burn you out. I'll hunt you through every territory. I'll destroy everyone you've ever cared about. You're mine, Marnie. You'll always be mine. And that ledger," his smile returned, cold and certain, "that ledger will never see daylight. I'll make sure of that." "You're wrong," Marnie said. "The ledger's already gone. Copies are already on their way to newspapers, to officials you don't control, to people who'll make sure everyone knows what you and your father did. You can kill me, kill all of us, but you can't stop the truth anymore." For the first time, Thomas looked uncertain. "You're lying? Test me." They stared at each other across the clearing, a woman who'd survived hell and the man who'd put her through it. And Thomas saw in her eyes something he'd never seen before, someone who'd stopped being afraid of him. He wheeled his horse around. "Let's go. We'll return with the sheriff and proper warrants." "You do that," Verla called after him. "By then the whole territory will know what kind of man you are." They watched Thomas and his men ride away, the sound of hooves fading into the forest. Only when they were truly gone did Marnie's legs give out. She sank into the mud, shaking uncontrollably. Verla knelt beside her. "It's all right. You did it. You stood up to him. He'll come back," Marnie whispered. "With more men, with fire. He'll let him try." We've got time now. Time for Tobias to spread the evidence. Time for the truth to get out. Verla helped Marnie to her feet. Come on, let's get inside and make sure Ma's all right. Then we prepare for what comes next. Inside the cabin, Opal was calmly reloading the rifle. Should have aimed higher, she said. Could have ended this right there. No, Marnie said. He needs to live. He needs to face justice publicly. He needs to see everything he built crumble around him. Death would be too easy. Opal nodded approvingly. Smart girl. Revenge is best served with witnesses. They barricaded the door and windows, preparing for siege. But as hours passed and no one returned, they began to understand. Thomas had retreated to regroup, to plan. The next attack would be more organized, more brutal. But they'd bought time, and sometimes time was all you needed for the world to change. The day after Thomas's visit, a rider came from town. Not one of his men, but a young woman Verla knew, a farmer's daughter named Hannah, who sometimes helped with difficult births. She arrived at dawn, her horse lathered from hard riding. Mrs. Deeks, she gasped, sliding from the saddle. You need to hear this. The whole town's talking. They brought her inside, gave her water, waited while she caught her breath. Finally she spoke. Yesterday afternoon, a rider came through Stillwater with newspapers from the territorial capital. Front page, all about the Garrison family. Corruption, bribery, violence against women. It's everywhere. They're calling it the Garrison conspiracy. People are reading it out loud in the streets. The sheriff locked himself in his office and won't come out. Marnie's hand went to her mouth. Already? But Tobias only left 3 days ago. He must have ridden hard, Hannah said. Or maybe he sent someone ahead with urgent copies. Either way, the story's out. And Thomas Garrison's reputation is destroyed. Verla felt relief flood through her, but also caution. Destroyed how? What exactly is being said? Hannah pulled a folded newspaper from her coat. I brought you a copy. See for yourself. The headline read, Decades of Corruption, How One Family Bought a County. Below it, column after column detailed the findings from Thomas's mother's ledger and Catherine's letters. Names were named. Bribes were listed with amounts and dates. The disappearances and suspicious deaths of women were chronicled with careful documentation. But what struck Marnie most was the introduction to the article. It was written by someone identified as Matilda Crane, the very journalist Opal had mentioned. The opening paragraph read, This reporter has been investigating corruption in frontier territories for 30 years. Never have I encountered a more systematic perversion of justice than that practiced by the Garrison family of Montana. The evidence presented here, compiled by brave women who risked everything to document the truth, reveals not merely individual crimes but a generational pattern of violence against women enabled by purchased officials and community silence. This is not just a Montana story, it is an American story, repeated wherever wealth concentrates power, and women's voices are systematically silenced. She understood, Marnie whispered. She didn't just report the facts. She explained what they meant. There's more, Hannah said. Judge Henshaw resigned yesterday. Sheriff Morton is under investigation by territorial authorities. Dr. Whitmore fled town. Nobody knows where. And Thomas... She paused, searching for words. Thomas is holed up in his house with armed guards. People are gathering outside his property, demanding answers. Some are angry. Some just want to know what happened to their sisters, daughters, friends who disappeared. Are they threatening violence? Verla asked. Not yet, but the mood is ugly. 30 years of silence breaking all at once. It's like a dam bursting. Gideon spoke up from his corner. He'll blame Marnie for everything. Say she stole documents, forged evidence, made it all up out of spite. He's already tried that, Hannah said. Started telling people yesterday that his wife was mentally unstable, that she'd fabricated everything. But then other women came forward. Women who'd been servants in the Garrison house, women who'd seen things. One woman, her name's Louise Patterson. She stood up in the general store and said she'd been 15 when Benjamin Garrison assaulted her. Said her father took money to keep quiet, and she's been ashamed ever since. But seeing Marnie's courage made her brave enough to tell the truth. Marnie felt tears on her face. She spoke up? She did, and then others followed. By evening, there were a dozen women sharing stories. Not all about the Garrisons directly, but about men who'd hurt them and faced no consequences. About a system that protected abusers and blamed victims. It's like, Hannah struggled to describe it, it's like the whole town is waking up to something they've known all along, but pretended not to see. They spent the morning reading the newspaper, absorbing the scale of what had happened. The article didn't just expose Thomas and his father, it questioned the entire power structure that had enabled them. It named complicit officials, documented bribes, and most damning of all, it centered women's voices. The testimony of Thomas's mother, Catherine, and Marnie weren't treated as hysterical accusations, but as credible witness statements deserving of legal response. Tobias did this, Verla said, pride thick in her voice. He got the evidence to the right people, convinced them to act immediately. My boy understood how urgent this was. When will he be back? Marnie asked. Today or tomorrow, if he's smart. He'll want to be here when Thomas makes his next move. And Thomas would make a move. They were certain of that. A man who'd built his life on control and power wouldn't simply accept public humiliation. He'd lash out, try to salvage something from the wreckage. Hannah stayed through the morning, helping them prepare. They reinforced the cabin's defenses, barricading windows, positioning rifles at strategic points, ensuring they had water and food for a prolonged standoff if necessary. Opal, despite her age, worked alongside them with grim determination. I've lived through worse than Thomas Garrison, she said, packing ammunition into a box. Survived a Lakota raid in 42, a wildfire in 51, outlaws in 58. One entitled Rich Man with a Grudge doesn't scare me much. By midday, Hannah left to return home, taking with her copies of the newspaper to distribute to farms and settlements that might not have seen it yet. Information is weapon, she said as she mounted her horse. The more people who know the truth, the harder it is for Thomas to fight back. After she left, they settled into waiting. The cabin felt simultaneously too small and too exposed, a fragile shelter against the storm they knew was coming. Marnie spent the afternoon writing, not copying evidence this time, but composing her own account of the past year. She wrote about meeting Thomas, the courtship that had seemed like a fairy tale, the gradual revelation of his true nature. She wrote about the isolation, the control, the violence, both physical and psychological. She wrote about Grace's death and her conviction that Thomas had somehow caused it. And she wrote about the decision to run, the terror and determination of that night, the long walk through snow that had led her to Verla's door. What are you doing? Verla asked, watching her work. Giving testimony, Marnie said. The newspaper has facts and evidence, but I want people to understand what it felt like. What it's like to live with a man who sees you as property. Maybe if enough people read it, they'll recognize the pattern in their own lives. Their own families. You're becoming dangerous, Verla observed with a slight smile. A woman with words and the courage to use them that terrifies men like Thomas more than rifles. As afternoon faded to evening, they heard horses again, but this time the sound was welcome. Tobias emerged from the tree line, accompanied by two other riders. As they drew closer, Marnie recognized one of them from the newspaper photograph. It was a younger man, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and an intense expression. That's Marcus Tully, Verla said. He runs the territorial newspaper. If Tobias brought him here, they rushed outside. Tobias dismounted, embracing his mother briefly, before turning to introduce his companions. This is Marcus Tully, editor of the Capital Observer, and this is Deputy Marshal James Cordell, sent by the territorial government to investigate the Garrison allegations. The marshal was an older man, weather-beaten and serious. He touched his hat to the women. Mrs. Deeks, Mrs. Garrison, I'm here to take formal statements and provide protection if needed. The governor takes these allegations very seriously." Marnie felt something loosen in her chest. The coiled tension she'd carried for months. Official protection. A federal marshal who answered to authorities beyond Thomas's reach. It was more than she dared hope for. "How bad is it in town?" Verla asked. "Chaotic," Marcus Tully said, pulling out a notebook. "Public opinion turned against the garrisons overnight, but Thomas isn't conceding defeat. He's hired more men, fortified his property. Rumor is he's planning to leave the territory, but he wants to settle accounts first." "Meaning he wants to kill Marnie," Gideon said bluntly. "Possibly, which is why Marshal Cordell is here. As long as Mrs. Garrison is under federal protection, Thomas can't touch her without committing a crime that even his money can't make disappear." They moved inside, crowding around the table. The marshal took detailed statements from everyone. Verla about her encounters with Thomas's family over the years, Gideon about the wanted poster and Cooper's visit, Opal about Catherine and the other women who'd disappeared. And Marnie gave her full testimony, holding nothing back, describing in careful detail every aspect of her marriage and Thomas's systematic abuse. Marcus Tully scribbled notes frantically. "This is powerful material. With your permission, I'd like to publish your complete testimony as a follow-up article. First-person narrative from a survivor. It'll make the evidence even more damning." "Do it," Marnie said without hesitation. "I want everyone to know exactly what kind of man Thomas Garrison is." As evening fell, they shared a meal, cramped. Quarters now with 8 people in the small cabin, but nobody minded. There was a sense of solidarity, of having survived to see the tide turn. Even Gideon seemed lighter, joking with Tobias about the precarious stack of sleeping arrangements they'd need to work out. But as they settled for the night, Marshal Cordell pulled Verla aside. "You should know," he said quietly. "Thomas made threats before I left town. Said there would be consequences for those who betrayed him. I've sent word for additional marshals to come from the capital, but they won't arrive for 3 or 4 days. Until then, I'm your only official protection. 1 marshal against however many men Thomas can hire," Verla said. "Those aren't good odds." "No, but you've got something Thomas doesn't have anymore, public support. If he attacks this cabin now, with a federal marshal present and reporters documenting everything, he'll prove every allegation against him. He'd be admitting guilt in the most public way possible. You're assuming he cares about that. A man facing the loss of everything doesn't always think clearly." "True, which is why I'm suggesting we don't wait for him to come to us. Tomorrow, I'm going to Thomas's estate with a warrant for his arrest. Would you and Mrs. Garrison be willing to accompany me as witnesses?" Verla's eyes widened. "Do you want us to confront him directly?" "I want him to see that the women he terrorized aren't afraid anymore. I want him to face justice with you standing there, representing everyone he's harmed. It's not standard procedure, but—" The marshal paused. "I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've seen too many cases where powerful men escape consequences because their victims are too frightened or too broken to face them. You two aren't broken. And I think seeing that will destroy Thomas more effectively than any prison sentence." Verla looked across the cabin to where Marnie sat talking quietly with Tobias. "It's her decision. She's the one who suffered most." When they asked Marnie, her response was immediate. "Yes, I'll face him. I want him to see that he didn't win, that all his control, all his violence, all his money couldn't break me. I want that to be the last thing he sees before they take him away." Marshal Cordell nodded with satisfaction. "Then tomorrow we finish this. We end the garrison reign once and for all." But none of them slept easily that night. They all understood that Thomas Garrison, cornered and desperate, was more dangerous than he'd ever been. And tomorrow they would walk directly into his territory, relying on law and public opinion to protect them against a man who'd built his life on circumventing both. Marnie lay by the fire, one hand on the locket at her throat, the other on the knife at her belt. She thought of Grace, of Thomas's mother, of Catherine, of all the women whose voices had been silenced. Tomorrow she would speak for all of them. Tomorrow the silence would finally end. They left at dawn, a small party riding down the mountain toward Thomas Garrison's estate, Marshal Cordell in the lead, followed by Verla and Marnie, with Tobias and Marcus Tully bringing up the rear. Gideon stayed behind with Opal, rifles ready in case this was a diversion, and Thomas planned to attack the cabin while they were away. The ride took 2 hours. As they descended from the mountain, the landscape changed, the wild forest giving way to cleared land, then to the manicured grounds that announced wealth and power. Thomas's estate sprawled across a valley, its main house a testament to accumulated money, 2 stories of imported brick, glass windows that caught the morning light, a wide porch supported by columns that seemed lifted from a southern plantation. It was obscene, Marnie thought, that so much beauty had been built on so much suffering. A dozen men lounged around the property's perimeter, hired guards armed with rifles and revolvers. They straightened as the marshal's party approached, hands moving to weapons. Marshal Cordell raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. "I'm Deputy Marshal James Cordell, here on official territorial business. I need to speak with Thomas Garrison." One of the guards, a thick-necked man with a scar across his cheek, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Mr. Garrison ain't receiving visitors. This isn't a social call. I have a warrant for his arrest. You can let me through, or you can be charged with obstruction of justice. Your choice." The guard's eyes flicked to his companions, calculating odds. Finally, he stepped aside. "Your funeral, Marshal." They rode through the gate and up the curved drive to the main house. Marnie's hands were shaking. She couldn't help it. The last time she'd been here, she'd been running for her life through these same grounds, Thomas's shouts echoing behind her. Now she was returning, but on her terms. Thomas emerged onto the porch before they could dismount. He was impeccably dressed, as always, dark suit, polished boots, hair perfectly groomed. But his face had changed. The smooth mask of civility he'd always worn had cracked, revealing something harder and more desperate underneath. "Marshal," he said, his voice cold. "To what do I owe this intrusion?" "Thomas Garrison. I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and suspicion of involvement in multiple suspicious deaths. You'll need to come with me to the territorial capital to answer these charges." Thomas laughed, a sound without humor. "On what evidence?" "The forged documents my deranged wife stole from my home. The fantasies of dead women who can't defend their reputations. I've spoken with my attorneys, Marshal. They assure me that none of this will stand up in court." "Your attorneys are wrong," Cordell said calmly. "We have corroborating testimony from multiple witnesses. We have financial records showing bribes. We have—" "You have nothing," Thomas's eyes fixed on Marnie. "You have the lies of a woman who proved herself a thief and a liar. A woman who couldn't even keep her own child alive. The words were calculated to wound, and they did." Marnie flinched as if struck. But then she felt Verla's hand on her arm, steadying her, and she found her voice. "Grace died because of you," she said, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "You controlled when she ate, how she was cared for, who could hold her. You isolated her the same way you isolated me. And when she died, you wouldn't let me grieve. You said it was God's will, but I know better. You killed her just like you killed your mother." "I never touched my mother," Thomas said, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or rage barely controlled. "Not directly. You didn't have to. You just made sure she knew what would happen if she tried to leave, if she tried to expose you. You made sure she understood that the stairs were dangerous, that accidents happened to women who didn't know their place." Marnie dismounted, taking a step forward. "But she left evidence anyway. She documented everything, every bribe, every threat, every woman who disappeared. And now the whole territory knows what you are." Thomas descended the porch steps slowly, and for the first time, Marnie saw the full extent of his fury. His hands were clenched, his jaw tight, his eyes holding a murderous rage that no amount of civilized dress could conceal. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. "My family's name, my business, my standing in the community. All because you couldn't be a proper wife. All because you couldn't be grateful for what I gave you. You gave me nothing but pain," Marnie replied. "And you're right. I destroyed what you built. But what you built was founded on violence and corruption. It deserved to be destroyed. You sanctimonious—" Thomas took another step forward, and suddenly there was a gun in his hand, a small pistol he'd had concealed. He aimed it directly at Marnie's chest. "You want to talk about justice? Here's justice. You took everything from me, so I'll take the one thing you have left, your life." Marshal Cordell's hand went to his own weapon, but Thomas was faster, training the gun on him. "Don't. I'll shoot her before you clear leather, and then I'll shoot you. My men will testify it was self-defense, that you came here to kill me, and I defended myself." "Who will a jury believe? A decorated veteran and prominent citizen, or a dead marshal and a lying wife?" "A jury will believe the truth," Cordell said, his voice steady. "There are witnesses here. A newspaper editor documenting everything. You can't make this disappear, Thomas. Watch me." For a terrible moment, Marnie was certain he would shoot. She saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the calculation in his eyes, wondering if he could kill them all, if his money and influence could smooth over even this. But then a voice came from behind them, thin but clear. "Thomas Garrison, you are a coward and a murderer, and I will testify to that before God and everyone." They turned. An elderly woman stood at the gate, leaning heavily on a cane. She was dressed in black, her white hair pinned severely, her face lined with age and grief. Behind her stood others, women of various ages, some Marnie recognized from her time in the household, others she'd never seen. "Mrs. Patterson," Thomas said, lowering the gun slightly, "this is none of your concern." "It's every woman's concern," Louise Patterson replied, walking slowly forward. "I'm the woman whose daughter disappeared from your employ 5 years ago. Josephine, you remember her? 16 years old, sweet girl, wanted to earn money for her family. She worked in your house for 3 months, and then one day she was just gone. You said she'd stolen and run off, but I never believed that. And now I know why." More women emerged from behind her, forming a line. One by one they introduced themselves. "I'm Margaret Shaw. My sister Catherine worked here and died at Miller's Gorge. I never believed it was an accident. I'm Helen Whitfield. My daughter Anna disappeared from this house in 1867. I've been searching for her ever since. I'm Rose Camden. I was a servant here. Mr. Garrison—" Her voice caught. "Mr. Garrison hurt me. I was too afraid to say anything until now. They kept coming, kept speaking, a chorus of voices that had been silent for years, finally finding the courage to testify." Marnie felt tears streaming down her face as she watched them. These women who'd suffered in silence, now standing together in the morning light. Thomas's gun hand was shaking now. He looked around at the growing crowd, at the women bearing witness, at the marshal and the newspaper editor documenting everything. The realization was dawning on him. He'd lost, not just his wealth and reputation, but something more fundamental, the power to make women disappear, to silence testimony, to control the narrative. "You can shoot me," Marnie said quietly, "but it won't matter anymore. The truth is out. These women are speaking. Your reign is over." Thomas's face twisted with rage and desperation. For a moment, the gun swung toward Marnie again, and she prepared herself for the shot, but then Verla was there, stepping between Marnie and the gun, her own weathered hands steady, her voice carrying the weight of 60 years of survival. "You want to shoot someone? Shoot me. I'm the one who helped her. I'm the one who hid her. I'm the one who helped spread your mother's testimony. But before you do, understand this. Every woman standing here will remember. Every newspaper will report it. Your name will be synonymous with cowardice, the man who shot an unarmed woman because he couldn't face justice." Thomas looked at Verla, then at Marnie, then at the crowd of women whose testimony was destroying him. And something in him broke. The gun lowered. His shoulders sagged. He looked for the first time like what he truly was, a small, pathetic man who'd built his identity on hurting people weaker than himself. "It's over, Thomas," Marshal Cordell said, moving forward with handcuffs. "Time to face what you've done." Thomas didn't resist as the marshal secured his hands. But as he was led toward the horses, he looked back at Marnie one last time. The rage was gone from his eyes now, replaced by something that might have been understanding, the recognition that he'd lost not just his freedom, but any claim to being the victim in this story. "I'll see you destroyed," he said quietly. "Even from prison I have resources. I have influence. This isn't over." "Yes," Marnie said, her voice steady and sure. "It is." As Marshal Cordell led Thomas toward his horse, one of the hired guards, the scarred man from the gate, stepped forward, rifle raised. "Let him go, Marshal, or we've got a problem." Several other guards moved closer, weapons ready. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Federal authority against hired guns, who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by stopping Thomas's arrest. Cordell's voice remained calm. "You men understand what you're doing? Interfering with a federal marshal in the performance of his duties is a hanging offense. Thomas Garrison can't pay you from prison, and his assets will be frozen during investigation. You'll get nothing for dying here today." The scarred man hesitated, looking to his companions. But another guard, younger and more hot-headed, raised his rifle toward the marshal. "We don't take orders from—" The shot came from the tree line, clean, precise, and perfectly aimed. It struck the ground inches from the young guard's feet, sending up a spray of dirt. Everyone froze. Gideon emerged from the forest, his rifle still smoking, with a half-dozen men behind him, trappers and farmers whom Tobias had clearly recruited on the ride down. "That was a warning," Gideon called out. "Next one won't be. Marshal Cordell has legal authority here. Anyone interfering with that authority answers to us, and we outnumber you 2-1 more." Men appeared from different positions around the property. Tobias had been busy organizing while Thomas had focused on fortifying his house. The hired guards found themselves surrounded, their employer in custody, their cause suddenly looking very expensive and very foolish. The scarred man lowered his rifle slowly. "This ain't worth dying for," he muttered. He looked at his companions. "Any of you want to face a firing squad for a man who's already finished?" "I sure don't." One by one, the guards set down their weapons. Some mounted their horses and rode off immediately. Others simply walked away, abandoning their posts and the man who'd paid them. Within minutes, Thomas stood alone in his own yard, surrounded by the law and the community that had finally turned against him. Marcus Tully was scribbling furiously in his notebook, documenting every detail. "This is remarkable," he said to Marnie. "The way the community came together. How long did you plan this?" "We didn't," Tobias answered. "Word just spread after your first article published. Folks started talking, sharing stories. Turns out a lot of people had grievances against the garrisons. Debts forced at unfair rates, land stolen through legal tricks, daughters and wives mistreated. When someone finally stood up to them, others found courage to do the same." Louise Patterson approached Marnie, her old hands reaching for the younger woman's. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being brave enough to fight when the rest of us couldn't, for giving voice to all the daughters we lost." "I'm sorry I couldn't save Josephine," Marnie said, her throat tight. "I'm sorry I didn't find the evidence sooner. You found it when you were meant to, and now," Louise looked at Thomas, handcuffed and defeated, "now he'll answer for what he did. That's more justice than I ever hoped for." Marshal Cordell secured Thomas on a horse, tying his hands to the saddle horn. "We'll ride to Stillwater, collect additional evidence, and then proceed to the capital for trial. Mrs. Garrison, Mrs. Deeks, I'll need you both to come to the capital next week to provide formal testimony before the territorial judge." "We'll be there," Verla said. As they prepared to leave, Thomas spoke one last time, his voice carrying to Marnie. "You think you've won, but look at what it cost you. You have no home, no family, no reputation. You're alone." Marnie met his eyes steadily. "I'm not alone. I have people who chose to stand with me because it was right, not because they were bought or forced. I have a community that values truth over power, and I have something you'll never have. I have peace, because I know I did the right thing even when it was hard. Can you say the same?" Thomas had no answer. He looked away, and in that moment Marnie saw him clearly, not as the monster who'd haunted her nightmares, but as a broken man who'd built his entire identity on control he no longer possessed. He was pathetic more than terrifying, and that realization freed something in her chest that had been locked tight since Grace's death. She was done being afraid of him. The marshal's party rode out, taking Thomas toward justice. The women who'd come to testify dispersed slowly, some embracing each other, others walking in quiet groups back toward town. The hired guards were gone. The grand house stood empty, its windows reflecting nothing but sky. Marnie turned to Verla. "Is it really over?" "The dangerous part is," Verla replied. "There'll still be a trial, testimony, legal proceedings. But Thomas can't hurt you anymore. He can't make you disappear or silence you. That power is gone." Gideon approached, looking uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. When you first came to our cabin, I thought you were trouble. Turns out you were salvation for a lot of women who needed someone to fight for them." "We fought together," Marnie said simply. "I couldn't have done this alone." They began the long ride back up the mountain, but this time the journey felt different. The weight that had pressed on Marnie's shoulders for months was lifting. She could breathe fully for the first time since leaving Thomas's house. As they reached the cabin, Opal was waiting on the porch, her face lit with a rare smile. "I heard shooting. Figured it was either very good or very bad." "Very good," Tobias said, dismounting. "Thomas is arrested, his guards scattered, and half the county turned out to witness it." "About time," Opal said with satisfaction. "Took you all long enough?" That evening they celebrated, not with alcohol or excess, but with simple gratitude. Verla made a proper supper with the last of their winter stores. They told stories, laughed, and for a few hours let themselves feel the relief of having survived something terrible. But as night fell and the others settled for sleep, Marnie slipped outside. The air was cold, but carried the promise of spring, that particular sharpness that meant winter's grip was finally breaking. She walked to the edge of the clearing and looked up at the stars, thinking of Grace, of Thomas's mother, of Catherine, of all the women whose voices had led to this moment. "We did it," she whispered to the night. "We made them listen." Verla found her there a few minutes later, standing in the starlight. "You all right?" "Yes," Marnie said, and meant it. "For the first time in years, I'm actually all right. What will you do now?" "After the trial." Marnie had been thinking about that. "I want to stay here if you'll have me. Learn midwifery properly. Help other women who need refuge. Maybe," she paused, the idea still forming, "maybe we could make it official. A place where women running from violence know they can find safety. Where they can heal and find their strength again, the way I did." Verla considered this, then nodded slowly. "Catherine's house. We could call it Catherine's house after the woman who tried first. Make sure she's remembered." "Catherine's house," Marnie repeated, liking the sound of it. "A refuge and a reminder." Yes. They stood together in the darkness. Two women who'd survived different hells, but found common purpose. Below them, the valley was dark and quiet. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering, but somehow comforting in their constancy. The war wasn't completely over. There would still be legal battles, social consequences, the slow work of rebuilding. But the decisive battle had been won. The silence had been broken. Women had spoken, and the world had listened. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Spring came fully to the mountains, snow melting into rushing streams, green pushing through brown earth. Marnie stood on the cabin porch, watching the transformation, marveling at how the world could change so completely in just a few weeks. The trial had been everything they'd hoped for and more. Thomas Garrison was convicted on multiple counts: conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice. The evidence of his involvement in the deaths of several women couldn't be proven beyond reasonable doubt. The bodies were long buried. Witnesses were dead, but the testimony was damning enough that the judge sentenced him to 20 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized to pay restitution to victims' families. Benjamin Garrison, his father, was also implicated. Too old and ill to stand trial, he died in his mansion 3 weeks after Thomas's conviction, alone, except for servants who were paid to stay. No one mourned him. His funeral was attended by exactly 4 people: a lawyer settling his estate, a priest performing his duty, and two gravediggers who didn't care whose body they were burying. The ripple effects continued. Sheriff Morton was removed from office and charged with corruption. Judge Henshaw fled the territory, but was arrested in Wyoming and extradited back for trial. Dr. Whitmore was found in Nevada, and likewise brought back to face charges. The entire corrupt network that the garrisons had built was systematically dismantled, replaced by officials who at least paid lip service to justice. But the real change was quieter and more profound. Women across the territory began speaking up about their own experiences. Other cases of abuse were reported, investigated, prosecuted. The social contract that had protected violent men through silence and shame was cracking. Not completely. That would take generations, but enough that women began to believe they might be heard if they spoke. Marnie had testified at the trial for 3 days, recounting every detail of her marriage to Thomas, of finding the ledger, of her escape. The defense attorney tried to paint her as vindictive, mentally unstable, a woman scorned, seeking revenge. But when she was asked why she'd risked everything to expose Thomas rather than simply disappearing, her answer silenced the courtroom. Because I had a daughter. Her name was Grace, and she lived 6 months before dying under suspicious circumstances that were never investigated. If I'd stayed silent, if I'd just run and hidden, then Grace's death would have meant nothing. But if my testimony prevents one more child from growing up in a house where violence is normal, then Grace's life, short as it was, will have mattered. That's worth any risk to me. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, even among the jurors. Now, 2 months after the trial, life had settled into new patterns. The cabin had been expanded. Tobias and several neighbors had built an addition, creating separate rooms for the women they all knew would come seeking refuge. The project was funded partly by reward money the territorial government paid to Marnie for exposing corruption, and partly by donations from women across the territory who wanted to support what they were building. They'd hung a sign at the trail entrance, "Catherine's House, Safe Haven for Women." Already 3 women had found their way to the door. One was fleeing an abusive husband. Another had been assaulted and had nowhere else to go. And the third was simply too poor to survive alone through winter. All were welcomed, taught skills, given time to heal. Verla had taken to the role of haven keeper with natural authority, treating each woman with the same matter-of-fact compassion she'd shown Marnie. "Everyone's got a right to survival," she'd say. "We're just making sure they get the chance to exercise it." Marnie had become Verla's apprentice in earnest, learning midwifery and herbcraft with dedication that surprised even herself. She had a gift for it. Gentle hands, a calm presence, an intuitive understanding of when to intervene and when to trust the body's wisdom. She'd already assisted at 4 births, and mothers were beginning to request her specifically. Opal had declined through spring, but remained sharp-minded to the end. She died peacefully in her sleep on a warm April night, surrounded by the family she'd helped build. They buried her on the hillside overlooking the valley, with a headstone that read, "Opal Deeks, she remembered." It was Marnie's idea, honoring the old woman's role as keeper of stories, preserver of testimony that others wanted forgotten. Tobias continued his work trapping and logging, but he'd also become something of a coordinator for the network of safe houses that were springing up across the territory. Women helping women, creating underground pathways to safety, sharing information about which towns were safe and which men were dangerous. It was informal, unorganized, but effective. Gideon had surprised everyone by becoming engaged to Hannah, the farmer's daughter who'd brought news of the newspaper article. They planned to marry in summer and build a cabin nearby, becoming part of the expanding community of protection. On a morning in late May, Marnie walked to the small graveyard they'd established on the property. 3 markers stood there, Opal's and 2 others, wooden crosses they'd erected for Catherine and Thomas's mother, women who'd fought and died for justice. She placed wildflowers at each grave. "We did it," she told them quietly. "Not perfectly, not completely, but we did it. Women are speaking. Men are listening, at least some of them." It's not the world you hoped for, not yet, but it's better than the one you left. And we'll keep working. We'll keep fighting. I promise you that." A sound behind her made her turn. A young woman stood at the edge of the clearing, thin and bruised, her eyes holding the same desperate fear Marnie remembered from her own reflection months ago. "Is this Catherine's house?" the woman asked, her voice barely audible. They said this was a place where women could be safe." Marnie walked toward her, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. "It is. You're safe here. What's your name?" "Rachel." "Rachel Cole. I'm running from my husband." Her voice broke. "He's going to kill me if he finds me." "Then we'll make sure he doesn't find you," Marnie said firmly. She held out her hand. "Come inside. You must be hungry, tired. We'll take care of you." Rachel took her hand tentatively, and Marnie led her toward the cabin. As they walked, she saw Verla on the porch, already preparing to welcome another lost soul. This was the work now. Not dramatic confrontations or courtroom testimony, but the quiet, daily labor of helping women rebuild their lives one person at a time. Inside the cabin, Rachel was given food, clean clothes, a place by the fire. As she ate, she began to talk, haltingly at first. Then with growing confidence about the violence she'd endured, the terror that had driven her into the mountains, the hope that maybe here she could find what she needed to start over. Marnie listened, offering comfort and practical advice, seeing her own journey reflected in this stranger's story. And she understood then what Catherine and Thomas's mother had understood too late. Individual courage mattered, but collective action was what changed worlds. That evening, as the household gathered for supper, Verla, Marnie, Tobias, Gideon, Hannah, Rachel, and 2 other women who'd found refuge at Catherine's house. Marnie looked around the crowded table and felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Belonging, purpose, home. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling Grace's image pressed against her heart. "I hope you'd be proud," she whispered to her daughter's memory. "I hope what we're building here would make you proud." After supper, as she prepared for bed, she found herself pulling out the journal she'd been keeping, her own testimony, written in careful detail for whatever woman might need it in the future. The final entry read, "Thomas Garrison took a year of my life. He took my daughter, my innocence, my belief that the world was fundamentally just. But he didn't take everything. He didn't take my voice, my courage, or my determination to ensure no other woman suffers in silence the way I did. Catherine's house stands now as proof that women can fight back, that we can build sanctuaries, even in the hardest country, that solidarity is stronger than any individual man's violence. This is what I've learned. Survival isn't enough. We must thrive. We must speak. We must refuse to let our stories end in unmarked graves and whispered warnings. We must demand better, louder and louder, until the world has no choice but to listen. And when it finally does, when justice comes, imperfect and incomplete as it is, we must keep going. Because the work is never finished. There will always be another woman knocking on the door, asking the bravest question she's ever asked. Can I stay here? And our answer must always be yes. She closed the journal and set it aside, knowing it would join the others, Catherine's notebook, Thomas's mother's ledger, as testament to what women could endure and overcome. Outside, night settled over the mountains. Stars emerged, bright and countless. Somewhere in the valley below, other women were suffering. Other battles were being fought. But here, on this mountain, in this refuge they'd built from courage and desperation and hope, women were safe. Women were heard. Women were becoming what they'd always had the potential to be, powerful. Marnie lay down to sleep, and for the first time since Grace's death, she slept deeply, without nightmares, without fear. The war wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But they'd won something precious. The right to fight back, the knowledge that fighting mattered, and the certainty that they wouldn't fight alone. The beaten woman who'd stumbled to Verla's door in winter's depths was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd faced her demons and survived, someone who'd turned her suffering into purpose. And tomorrow, when another woman knocked on the door, and someone would, they always did, Marnie would be ready. She would open that door wide, let the light spill out into the darkness, and offer the only words that mattered. Come in. You're safe here.